Good evening, and welcome to the Monday, December 12th, 2022 meeting of the City Council. I'd like to call this meeting to order and ask that you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Yes, Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Leon?
Here.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott is delayed. She should be here shortly. Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter.
Here.
And we do have 2 council members participating electronically. Is there a motion to allow that?
There might be. Let's hear, Phil.
I'm going to make a motion in regards to Mr. Snyder, who should identify the remote location and reason for his participation by electronic means. Mr. Snyder?
Thank you. Out of town to Florida, business trip regarding issues such as use of AI and ML and reforms to the National Flood Insurance Program. Last week, the subjects for discussion at the OECD included natural disaster risk mitigation and financing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I move the City Council approve electronic participation by Dave Snyder in tonight's meetings for personal reasons pursuant to the City Council's policy on participation in meetings through electronic means as adopted by Resolution 2022-02.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Madam Clerk?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan, sorry.
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott is not here. Mr. Snyder?
Yes, thank you.
Boy. Mayor Tarter? Let's just get 4 votes here.
All right, let's do it. Yes.
Was that a yes? Okay. And so
It
that
was.
passes 4-0, and Mr. Snyder can vote next time. Do we have another motion for Ms. Conley?
Mayor, I move that we allow electronic participation by Ms. Connolly. Ms. Connolly, can you identify your remote location and reason for participation?
I'm at home because of health reasons.
Okay, I move that the City Council approve electronic participation by Ms. Connolly in tonight's meeting for medical reasons pursuant to the City Council's policy on participation in meetings through electronic means as adopted by Resolution 2022-02.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we are done with that. Let's move on to adoption of the meeting agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt the meeting agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Let's move on now to a proclamation, a very special proclamation. Recognition of Beth Myers, the 2022 meeting of the Chet DeLong Award for Outstanding Service to the Library. We've got Mr. DeLong here as well. We've got a lot of great folks from the library in the audience, so I'm going to go turn it over to Jess to do the honors. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor and City Council, for having us here tonight. As you said, we're here to present the 2022 Chet DeLong Award for Outstanding Service to the Mary Riley Stiles Public Library. This award is given annually, starting in 2020, by the Mary Riley Stiles Public Library Foundation, who I'm representing tonight. We are a nonprofit that raises money to provide enhancements and improvements at our beloved local library. We started giving this award because we were absolutely on a mission to recognize the service of an incredibly special volunteer at the library, Mr. Chet DeLong, who I'm so glad was able to join us tonight, sitting in the front row. Chet volunteered over 25 years. Chet volunteered in every volunteer position possible, every volunteer position available at the library. He was on our board of trustees, providing leadership for 25 years. During that time, he showed up once a week to shelve books and do whatever was asked of him. We estimate he volunteered at least 300 hours a year for 25 years during that time. And he's also the founder of our library. He's one of the founding members of our library foundation. In fact, one of my fellow board members, Don Camp, remembers the foundation being started around Chet's dining room table. So we wanted to celebrate his service in a meaningful and long-term way and started to give this award. And before giving the 2022 award, I want to say a quick word about each of our previous awardees because they were given their awards during COVID and we did not bring them to City Council. In 2020, the award was given to Eric Albrecht, who started in the circulation department all the way back in 2004. Eric's sitting here on the end of this row. I'm sure you recognize him because he's helped nearly everyone in this community who visits the library. And besides his outstanding customer service and the fact that he's such a reliable employee at the library, we heard that he had really come through for his coworkers during COVID when life turned upside down as an incredibly positive and calm force in the library. And then in 2021, we gave the award to Claudia Gutierrez here in the middle of that row. As you know, from a patron standpoint, Claudia's work is behind the scenes, but staff see her face every day. She contributes very significantly to the operations of the library in her role as senior administrative assistant to the director, the kind of person without whom I'm sure the place would come to a grinding halt. And does it all with just a completely sunny personality that's a joy to all. So I know this group of library supporters is going to want to give a hand to our previous awardees. Thank you. So our 2022 awardee is Beth Meadows. She started with the library in 2006 as a substitute, moved into the circulation department as a part-time library assistant 1, and transitioned into a library position with the adult services department in 2015. Beth has always been a person who's willing to help, collaborate with, and support her coworkers, and provide excellent customer service, as we've all experienced. More recently, she's grown to demonstrate innovation and initiative at the library as well. She's been the point person for the Adult Summer Reading Program, worked on the program to provide library materials to homebound patrons, and coordinated library outreach with the Falls Church Senior Center. She's also provided insightful feedback on improving services and programs. Jenny said, "Beth comes to me with good ideas. When I say yes, she just goes and does them beautifully." So Beth, if you would please come forward to receive the 2022 Chet DeLong Award for Outstanding Service to the library.
Why don't you all, you're certainly welcome to say, go ahead, please.
I can just thank Chet for being such a wonderful volunteer for so many years. Thank the foundation and Jess for your work. They're doing some amazing work now to really boost the library. Thank you to Jenny, who's an amazing director and a leader of all of us. Thank my colleagues who make it worth coming to work every day. And thanks to the public. I mean, I really enjoy what I do. So thanks to everybody.
Thank you. Why don't you come forward and maybe our prior winners and maybe Chet as well, and we'll get a picture with council if you'd like. But we want to thank you for the great work you do. The library is such a special place for our community. It really is outstanding. So come on down and we'll get a nice photo maybe.
Yes. Go ahead, I'll follow you, Chet.
Thank you, Rick.
Or should I have this one? Okay.
Thank you again, and the library is just an incredible asset for our community. We greatly appreciate all the fine work you all do. All right, Madam Clerk, are there any oaths of office to administer?
Yes, sir. We have Jeff Pearson for the Human Services Advisory Council.
All right,
We'll wait for the traffic to clear.
sure. I'm sure that party will go on late into the night. That's right.
Hey.
Got it okay?
Yes.
All right, we ready?
Thank you.
All right. Do you, raise your hand, do you
Yep.
solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that you will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon you as a member of the Human Services Advisory Council according to the best of your ability, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, and you are sworn in and ready to assume your duties.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, congratulations.
Yay.
Was there anybody else here for an oath of office? I think that's it tonight. Thank
Let's keep moving. Let's move on to receipt of public comment. Summary of written comments, please.
Yes, for this meeting, we had a few comments about the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit that were submitted after the adoption on November 28th from Spencer Newman of 1216 Ellison Street, Melissa Polinsky, 201 Patterson Street, Sandra Quillen, and Dale Reuter of 1014 Railroad Avenue. We got a number of comments about the proposed T transition zoning changes in advance of the December 7 Planning Commission work session. From Michael Apfelbaum, Rosalie Bastarash, Susan Bastarash, Michael Beckley, David Beto, Dr. Michelina Bonanno, Lauren Bustamante of 301 West Broad Street, Gina Cacetti of 200 North Maple Avenue, Bob Clark of 701 Fulton Avenue, Marianne Criswell, Patrick David of 608 Park Avenue, Lori Dunch, 211 East Columbia Street, Andy Ehrlich, 1304 Ellison Street, James Ha, Cherry Davis, and William Becker of 503 South Spring Street, Jeff Hendrickson of 916 Park Avenue, Maria A. Canito Yort, 444 West Broad Street, Gwen Infante and Peter Infante of 200 South Oak Street, Jimmy Jung of 203 North Lee Street, Rod Kiefer, 205 North Oak Street, Nicholas Lavezzo, 212 East Jefferson Street, Venka McIntyre, 604 Tyson Drive, Garrick Malcolm, Maurice Metzger, Ann M. Peniston and Brian J. Peniston, 210 West Greenway Boulevard, Robert Reynolds, Joan Seiden, Dana R. Shaw, 1106 Seton Lane, Kathleen Schrock, Horatio Sobel of 310 Pennsylvania Avenue, Pat Solly of 125 Marshall Street, Jeff Sonderman, 604 Fulton Avenue, Karen Sprick, 608 Park Avenue, Douglas Stevens, 612 Park Avenue, Zena Such, Fred Thompson of 502 West Broad Street, the Falls Church Village Preservation and Improvement Society, John Ward, 335 Riley Street, Lisa Sampson Wenger, 1138 South Washington Street, Caitlin Yerkes, 202 North Oak Street, and the Environmental Sustainability Council also provided comments. The following submitted petitions opposing the proposed changes: Governor Square residents, Charlie Lord, Mary Chavis and Lauren Thomas, Peng Heinem, Sarah Snyder, and Great Falls North Maple Avenue, Garden Court, James Thurber Court, and West Columbia Street residents. In other comments, Nicholas Benton of 400 James Court asked that the city use any surplus budget funds to purchase a weekly full-page ad in the Falls Church News Press and consider a purchase of the Stratford Motel for public purposes. Craig Burry of 800 Villa Ridge Road asked council to consider the use of speed cameras, roundabouts, and walking and biking trails on city-owned phantom streets. Lisa Miller wrote to say how much she enjoyed the Holiday Lights event at Founders Row, and Dave Rifkin requested sidewalk repair on Whittier Circle.
All right, thank you very much. Let's now move on to the receipt of public comment. That's for folks here in the audience or on the internet. If you have not already done so and you wish to speak, please fill out a speaker slip, which is in the lobby outside, and hand it to the clerk, and she will call your name. Anyone who is to speak, we ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and state your name and address for the record. Madam Clerk, will you call the speakers, please?
Yes, first we have Charles Van Horn.
All right, welcome.
Hello. My name is Charles Van Horn. I live at 204 James Thurber Court, and I'm a junior at Meridian High School. I'm addressing the council today because I believe that there's a problem with homelessness in our city that needs solutions. I would like to ask the council to lobby the Virginia State Legislature for greater funds to address this problem and take a housing-first approach. Currently, the city has around $18 million in funds from the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, with $9 million coming in June of 2021 and another $9 million coming during July of 2022. The city should take a housing-first approach because it's proven to be effective in major cities such as Houston, and it lets homeless people be housed without having them meet any requirements or have any prerequisites to that event. So this allows people to function better in doing things like gaining meaningful employment and overcoming addiction when they don't have to worry about having a roof over their heads or where they're going to sleep. The city should also provide rental assistance to low-income families, and the Affordable Dwelling Unit program is a step in the right direction. Furthermore, I believe the city should establish an effective continuum of care with collaboration between the local government and NGOs like Facets Cares. While I'm not advocating for the end of temporary shelters, I believe that this is a less effective solution because while people will never be able to be housed as soon as they're out on the street, cities like San Diego, where they focus primarily on building temporary shelters, homelessness only went down 19%. So to conclude, I believe that the city should lobby for greater funds from the Virginia State Legislature for this problem, and that with these funds, they should take a housing-first approach to homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the very thoughtful and articulate comments. Thank you. Our next speaker, Madam Clerk.
Yes, we have Keith Thurston, followed by Joseph Sharizzi.
Good evening. I'm Keith Thurston of 1015 Birch Street. Tonight I'm speaking on behalf of the Catch Foundation, the sponsor of Watch Night, to announce that the Watch Night tradition will continue this year, resume, I should say, on December 31st. I should think it's the best celebration of New Year's Eve in the region. It'll start at 7 p.m. and last till midnight in the 100 block of West Broad Street. We'll have a nice mixture of music, Andrew Acosta Electric Band, Northern Lights Big Band Orchestra, Melonhead, which is classic rock, and Blue Ridge Sky country rock. There'll be amusement for kids of all ages to come out and enjoy themselves, and all the restaurants in the block will be open and taking reservations now, so it'll be good to come and have dinner and enjoy the fun. We appreciate the help of the city, all the staff, and especially our sponsors who will help funding this operation. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. I know it's a big mantle to take on, and so thank you so much for your service. Look forward to a fine evening.
Mayor
Madam,
Charter, can I ask a question?
yes, of
This
course.
is Ms. Connolly. Mr. Thurston, this is Mrs. Connolly, and I am just asking if you need help from student volunteers. I've had a request from the high school. They're looking for opportunities for students to volunteer over winter break, and I was thinking that that might be an opportunity. So if you can provide me with the contact information and what kind of jobs would be available, I will do my best to recruit you some help.
That's great. Yes, we do need more volunteers, and I'll send you a little synopsis of what they will be doing so they'll understand what they're getting into, which will be a great deal of fun. And also, we welcome additional sponsors as well. More details
Thanks.
will come out in the Falls Church News Press over the next couple of weeks.
All right, we look
Thank
forward
you.
to it. Thank
One
you.
more thing, though. Students are done school on Friday, Mr. Thurston. So if I want to get this to them, I need to
I'll
do
have
it
it to you
within the
tonight.
next 24 hours.
I'll
Great,
have it to you
thank you.
tonight. Thank you.
All right. Again, thank you, Madam Clerk. Let's move to the next speaker.
Yes, Mr. Shirizzi?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Joseph Shirizzi. I live on Gundry Drive, and I wanted to first start by thanking the council for, at its last session, passing a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit on many of the streets in Falls Church. I know the difference between 25 and 20 miles an hour in a lot of places doesn't seem like much, but can really seriously save lives. And I think it shows a lot of courage from this council to do things that might be seen as inconvenient to others, but when you know and you have the data and you know it's the right thing to do, you all did so unanimously, and that really meant a lot to me. So thank you for that. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the bike master plan, which was being worked on by a group of students, and an updated version was recently on last Wednesday presented to the Planning Commission. During their presentation, they mentioned that they didn't go all out on their recommendations for bike lanes and some other infrastructure because they felt that that would be too hard of a fight and cause too much political tension. So Bike Falls Church, a local biking and road safety advocacy group that is now over 200 members large, has written a letter that I'm not sure if we sent it by today. I think maybe later. Probably will be sent shortly. But we wanted to kind of preemptively say that we disagree with easy classifications for biking infrastructure on East Columbia Street, Park Ave, South Oak Street, West Marshall Street, and East Columbia, where there are high volumes during rush hour traffic and speeding problems. There's bike lanes that are not protected, painted on the side of roads, and I would really encourage council to check out any of those that you think should be included in a bike master plan, in a bike vision for connectivity in the city, and stand in them. If you wouldn't feel safe standing in a bike lane, how could it possibly be safe for a kid to bike to school in? Across the street from Rare Bird over by the Burke and Herbert Bank, there's a bike lane painted on the side of South Maple Street. And every single car that goes by drives through the painted lane there. It's incredibly scary. I also think it's worth mentioning that the survey that the students did, 80% of people that they surveyed said they would bike more in Falls Church if there was safe infrastructure, which 80% is a crazy number. So I really think that a lot more people would bike and would do it if the infrastructure was safe to do so. So the last thing, just please set a specific goal. let's say half a mile of bike lanes in Falls Church next year, and let's make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, are there any more speakers?
I don't have any more speaker slips unless somebody wishes to speak. I think we're good.
All right. Let's move on now to council requests. Are there any council requests? Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. Mr. Shields, I was glad to see over the past week that the South Maple and South Washington intersection is up and running. I think the community's been long waiting that completion. Do we know if we are planning a ribbon cutting or official communication, especially to our Fairfax County neighbors? Because I know it's something that they were looking forward to as well.
So we had not planned a ribbon cutting per se, but we will publicize it, and the purpose of that signal is to make it safer and easier for pedestrians to cross the street, along with all other users of that very busy corridor, to provide more breaks in the traffic and safe passage. And one of the things we did learn through an earlier Virginia Tech study and through a lot of engagement with the Greenway Downs neighborhood is that the Fairfax County residents really do want to cross the street and vice versa, and it's a really important commercial corridor, so this is an important safety improvement in that direction.
That's great. We had talked about some sort of celebration between the South Washington project and then waiting for this intersection. So whether it's ribbon cutting or just encouraging people, because I do think the history panels and the multimodal is really a big improvement for that area. So I think it's worth at least acknowledging the completion of both.
So we have been looking to plan it, one for the plaza, just as you know, with the history panels. And so we were thinking we might just bridge across to warmer months to do that. We did have the issue with the trees, and that did cause us to delay. We still working through contractual issues. All the new trees are in, which is good news, but that did make it so we did not want to have the ribbon cutting over the fall, which was our original plan.
Okay. And continuing on the theme of pedestrian and crosswalk safety, I know that several of us have fielded questions from the school community about the Haycock and Mustang Alley crosswalk. And I know there's been some internal discussions with the schools. Can you update everybody on where we are with that?
So we do have improved signage just to warn the traveling public as they're going down Haycock that there's a new pedestrian crossing. I think that signage is effective. We are also getting temporary lighting installed so that intersection, anybody in the middle of it will be more visible than they are right now. We expect that will be up very shortly. Within about a month's time, that crossing is going to move back towards the middle of the block, so that will improve visibility for students walking to school. But we'll keep the signage up just so that it's as you know, the drivers are as alert to what's happening on the street there as possible. And of course, we do have our crossing guards, but that's during the normal sort of main crossing times. That's very helpful, but we're also concerned about athletes and people who are staying late for band and other extracurriculars, and making sure that that's a safe crossing for them as well.
And we are trying to accelerate the actual permanent intersection light, right?
Yeah, the permanent signal is in process. That's in design. I think initial orders for materials and mast arms have been made. We expect that will be up and fully functional for the beginning of school year next year.
Well, I see Ms. Michaels in the audience joining us tonight. Thank you for joining us. Maybe between general government and schools, we can kind of do some sort of joint communication to let people know we are trying to be responsive to the safety concerns. And when these temporary measures are up and running, we can get some feedback on how they're working and how we can continue to keep our safety, our students' safety kind of at the forefront. Thank you. That's it.
Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. Speaking of traffic signals, I received an email today about the Gresham Place traffic signal, which according to the email is back on to the cycle that it had been on, allowing protected red coming out of Gresham Place. If that's true, I just want to celebrate that fact. If it's not true, let me put a marker in for an update at our first meeting in 2023 about the status and progress of how that's coming along. Thanks. Thank you. I'll follow up on what the facts are on that.
Other comments, Ms. Connolly?
Just to follow up on Ms. Hardy's comment on the traffic light on Route 29 and South Maple Avenue. It seems to be, I like that it has a blinking left yellow light, which seems to be a new thing. I don't think we have any of those in Falls Church. And that's going to be great to keep traffic moving and allow some safe left-hand turns. Is that the first one of those that we have, Mr. Shields? That would be another thing to promote.
Well, I think we have another one at West Street and Park Avenue, but I'll confirm if that's kind of similar to what you're talking about. So it's allowing a left turn across traffic, but that blinking, if it's just a pure green, then people have to make that left turn cautiously. I think the blinking yellow tries to emphasize you need to be cautious when you make that left turn across traffic.
It does, and it also allows, it's not just a no left turn if there's no arrow, so it allows a left turn when it's safe, but prevents otherwise. So anyway, it seems like a good addition.
Other comments for Mr. Shields? I would just note as to that intersection, we keep talking about West and 29, all the poles on the side, or the Falls Church side, are all kind of spread out. And so it actually, if you're someone in a wheelchair, it's actually kind of hard to navigate. I don't know if you've been out there on foot or seen that, but I hope that's something we can sort of focus more on is what the pedestrian experience is, particularly in a sidewalk that's really not that wide, but has, for example, the mast arm's like right dead in the middle of it. Then you've got, a traffic control box and it's just a whole bunch of stuff, but it's all kind of spread out. It's not grouped. And so, that one's done. But I would just say, I think in the future, we should try to focus a little bit more on the pedestrian experience at these intersections, particularly when we don't have a lot of sidewalk width.
Okay.
Anyway, for whatever that's worth. Any other comments that anyone has? If not, let's move on to the report of the city manager. We have several different briefings. I know, Mr. Shields, do you want to kick them off?
We do. We have, this will be, I think, a more lengthy than normal city manager's report. We've got a couple of kind of meaty topics to go through, and we'll start with a briefing on the potential for speed camera enforcement in school zones, and Chief Gavin will lead that briefing. We'll have our presentation of our annual comprehensive annual financial report, and Kristen Holland with Brown and Edwards will deliver that report for the City Council, and she's joined by our Chief Financial Officer, Kieran Bawa. And the third is a briefing on our 2022 classification and compensation study. And Mark Holcomb with Evergreen Solutions will provide that briefing to the City Council, and Mr. Mason is on the call to introduce him. Before we turn it over to Chief Gavin for the discussion on speed cameras, I did want to just note just one other thing, since the Maple Avenue signal was already mentioned. But I also would like to just provide a report to the community on leaf pickup. Our city DPW crews are working very hard to get leaves up, and we've augmented those city crews with additional private contractors to try to make sure that we've got as many of the streets cleared prior to the upcoming holiday season as possible. Like many in our region, some areas of our workforce are experiencing flu and COVID at high levels, and that includes our DPW operations. So I want to thank DPW and our contract managers for having plans for that contingency, which we were certainly hoping to avoid, but to be able to move quickly to get private contractors to add to the efforts of city staff. City staff have been working very hard. I think we had a stretch between Halloween and Thanksgiving of basically nonstop work to get the leaves up. I think 17 days out of 18, we had a run of having at least 2 trucks out all the time. And so we did get the lion's share of the heavy leaves up, and we have a handful of streets where the heavy leaves still we're working to get cleared. And then after that, it will be some of the more spotty areas throughout the city where we'll go and sweep those up as well. So appreciate the public's patience on that, but wanted to provide that update. If you do go on the city's website, you can find out where the crews are. We are currently working on the south side of Broad Street, so the Virginia Forest area is kind of a big area we want to get cleared, and then we'll be broadening back out to hit the areas that we've already hit once. Happy to answer any questions on that.
All right. So shall we turn it on over to the chief, who is...
Turn it over to Chief Gavin.
And Chief Gavin, before we get started, I understand today might be a special day for you. Might be your birthday, and I know this is a favorite place you'd like to spend your birthdays with City Council. We want to wish you a happy birthday and thank you for taking time for your out of your celebration to spend here with us this evening. And I don't know if we have any volunteers to sing happy birthday. No, we don't have. I'm sorry, we don't have any volunteers. So unless we declare martial law, I think we're stuck. Just wishing you happy birthday and again thanking you. But welcome.
You're on mute.
It looks like she's muted on our side.
I see it's coming on. Chief Gavin, we're going to try to work to get our audio up so we can hear you adequately. So maybe if you could keep sort of doing a voice test so we can make sure we'll know when we have it.
Still can't hear you. It's okay, don't worry. It's no worries.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, you're here.
We
You're
can
back.
hear you. Sophie to the
Yeah.
rescue.
Thank you, Sophie. Again, thank you, council. Delighted to be here on my birthday.
Uh-oh.
You muted yourself, Chief. This one's on you, I think. It looks like you're muted on your end.
All
Yeah, you
right,
did it
my
again.
paper hits it. Yep.
There you
okay,
go.
There we go. Thanks for the birthday gifts. I mean, the well wishes.
The gifts in the
One,
mail.
I just wanted to recognize that Steve Rao, Captain Rao, has been working very diligently through this process and has given you a great summary as to what the potentials are for this new technology. And as you know, and I'll give the community summary to the memo that you received. But as you know, that we have two very well-run photo enforcement programs in the city, one being Red Light, the second being our Stop Arm program. And this third potential speed monitoring device or fixed camera safety cameras would be a potential here for the city that we're going to recommend. What I'd like to do is just kind of take you through the reasoning as to what our recommendations are and how we got to that point. Is first, the programs that we're running are based on what's reasonable, fair, and legal. All the decisions that we made were based on the studies that were provided by the vendor, what we know of our enforcement capabilities, and working with DPW on the science behind the roadway topography. So we're looking at embarking upon three programs, the Red Light program, the Stop Arm program, and the Speed Camera program. Four major things we think about it: the legitimacy and trust in the community. We must obey the legislation that Virginia has established back in 2020 that gave us the opportunity to establish this technology in our communities, only in school zones and only in work zones. In the city of Falls Church, it will only be available to us in school zones. So we recognize that, as far as the legitimacy and trust in the community, we've run these programs, these photo enforcement programs, since 2015. And actually, the establishment of these programs by, back in the day, Captain Rick Campbell and PLR Uhlman really kind of set the stage for the whole Commonwealth of Virginia. So not only do we have legitimacy in the program that we're running ourselves, but also with our vendors and within the Commonwealth of Virginia. So that's really important to us to ensure what we're doing is the right thing by our recommendations. Legally, the state allows for us to set up fixed speed cameras in school zones. Of all of the school zones that we have studied in Falls Church, there was one viable option, and we can get to why the others aren't, but let me get to the option in which we are recommending. We're recommending the 800 block of West Broad Street. One, because of the legality of the school zone. It meets the requirements within the Virginia legislation. Additionally, the science behind the topography needed to capture the evidence for speeding cars is at that location, in basically one of the only locations that allows for us the actual smart engineering and smart enforcement. And then there's a cost factor. The amount of traffic that goes through the 800 and 900 block of West Broad Street would make it a viable option in terms of the cost of the program. Not only the cost of putting up the cameras, but the cost that the man hours that it takes to actually to manage the program. As you know, also legally in these programs, each and every violation that passes through these cameras has to be viewed by a law enforcement sworn officer in Falls Church. With the current programs that we have now, annually, we take in about 2,100 red light violations annually, and that would be 2021, the numbers. The school bus program, we take in about 812 violations a year. If we were to add this program and speed alone, we're looking at about 10,800 violations a year. So that's a significant workload. It's not something that is turnkey where the officers are not involved. This is a workload that would be put on officers to absolutely to look at each and every violation. It's something that we feel as if that can be done, but our initial cost of workload is something that we're just not very sure on in terms of how the workload will be spread out. Right now, we have a program in which we have officers that are on the street during their downtime, during typically midnight hours, viewing many of these camera violations. And we have it spread out to squads, and Steve Rao, our captain in charge of these programs, has it done in a systematic way, so it's not overloading any one squad or any one officers. Obviously, with 10,000 more violations in a year, you're looking at a significant workload. As far as the cost in terms of recouping fines, that would be subject to how council sees the need to set the fine schedule. Our neighbors in Fairfax City and Fairfax County have set the fine schedules on a graduated scale. There are some that if it's 19 miles per hour or less, let's say the trigger is 10 to 11 miles an hour over the speed limit. So you're looking at 36 miles an hour would be the trigger speed till if they're 36 over and 19 miles over plus, you're looking at something like $50. And then after that, $20 or more could go up to 100 and no more than 100. So there's some graduated fee schedules that could be applied, or you could go across the board at 50, 75, 100, whichever we deem appropriate. So I don't know what I'm saying to you is I don't have the perfect formula for you as far as what the overall cost and revenue would be. But I do know in terms of workload, there would be a cost. There would be a cost of officers coming off the street and viewing these. Even if we were to hire an additional officer just to do this, like a part-time officer or a retired officer, there's still a cost because even with a one-off of officers doing this, there has to be a system in place where there's a constant backup. So I would respectfully request that in this recommendation, we do one location. We do it a comprehensive study with DPW on the positioning of the cameras. I do believe that the 800 to 900 block of West Broad is our most viable option. We believe that we could probably do this one location with currently with the system that we have, but we'd be looking to the actual hours and the amount of time it takes our people. We would also request in this, if there is a return in revenue that council thinks strongly about reinvesting that revenue back into traffic safety, may it be for both the police and DPW. So for legitimacy and trust of this program that we've established back since 2015, I think it's important that we take this slow and we do one location. I think legally, I know that this location is the only one that provides us the bounds within within Virginia law. I think the topography that's presented at the 800 block of West Broad is exactly what we need for the cameras to capture the proper speed. And I think the cost is one in which it would be beneficial to the city to be able, one, to evaluate this as a safety program and also reinvesting back into traffic safety. So I'm here for any questions.
All right, thank you very much for that thorough report. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions or comments from folks. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you, Chief. That was terrific, very thorough report. I appreciate it. To make sure I had the numbers right, did I hear you say that based on the preliminary assessment, we're looking at 10,000 speed violations at this one spot?
Yes, I mean, if you look at the speed study that was given to you, I think a couple months ago, the potential violations by day, I think you're looking at anywhere between up to 50 a day. Now, those are actually ones that we would look at. We have to look at them all, right? And from those, you're probably taking off about 20% that there's these non-controllable factors that we cannot enforce. May it be weather. Sometimes weather prohibits us from seeing the license plate. There might be blockage of the license plate. There may be traffic interference. There may be cameras that go down for construction. So, I mean, there's some things that are uncontrollable that we would have to throw out. In addition to that 10,000, or after you cut off about, let's just say 20%, you have another for instance, in our red light program, we have like an 81% compliance. So of the violations, you're looking at something along the ways of 80% compliance and just paying. And then for the school bus, it's a little higher. You have an 88% compliance rate in pay. So after you dummy down those numbers, I should say, the 10,000, you get down to 20% less than that. And then there's probably beyond that, there's like possibly 20% less than, so 40% of those you would not see for various reasons, maybe pay or uncontrollable factors.
Got it. So maybe like 6,000 after you take out all the cuts.
Yeah, you're
Yes, but-
346.
I'm still
Yeah.
stuck on the fact that we might have 10,000 people speeding through that intersection, which is 3 to 5 times what we see in other ones, and pretty appalled by that. So that's, I think that makes the case itself that we should definitely do something for having automated enforcement, because you said 2,000 red light violations, right, at the 2 other intersections we had?
Yes, we have 21, essentially roughly 2,100 violations. And the key thing is, you know, I hear you about that, but I also want you to recognize, and I think you do, there's 10,000 or nearly 11,000 violations that an officer has to look at. So there's a workload there that it's really important for me to make sure that we capture that time for the officers.
Yep, and I think you'll probably have support that we share the sentiment that obviously if we are getting any revenue from this, number one, we obviously get the speed deterrent and the safety improvements,
Right.
but we should reinvest in the program, whether that's the form of officers or, you know, the resources that you need to make this program run. I would fully support that. A few other questions, though. So even very conservatively, using that tiered fine structure that you talked about, Chief, the $50 if you're 11 to 19 miles an hour over speed limit, or $100 if you're excessively speeding, i.e. 20 miles an hour, even the conservative kind of 6,000 violations at this intersection times $50 is pretty significant
Yes.
revenue. So that, I think, is kind of a no-brainer for me. But a few other questions. I think the legislation requires that we can only enforce this on school days. Is that correct? So only 9 months of the year?
Yes. So it's estimated you have your 9 months of the year, but you also have 20 days of the month. So it's not, obviously every day of the week. So yes, you're estimated 20 days a month on average, the vendor says.
Okay. And does this apply at nighttime as well? Or is it only during
For
school
instance,
hours?
It's only during school hours.
Okay, so if people are speeding at 9 o'clock at night through this corridor, then they don't get cited?
Right, they don't. I mean, it's only going to be during when they're traveling to and from school, essentially, and during school hours. Now, it does not, as I understand, it does not count for, like, we had the football game or the basketball game where there's still a healthy community at the school. It doesn't count for that.
Okay. And then I guess my last question is, because I'm very familiar with the 900 block and the Spring and West Broad intersection in particular. I'm there probably 4 to 6 times a day walking or running. What are the pros and cons of using speed cameras versus red light cameras at that intersection? The reason I asked about the red light one is I have now taken the habit of actually not even crossing when I get the PED signal because I know someone will run the red light almost probably predictably every time. I even tell my kids that even after you get the white head, like, don't step off, count to 3, make sure all the cars are stopped because we get so many red light runners there. Have we looked at the potential to use red light there instead, or could we do both? Does one preclude the other?
You certainly could talk to the vendor about that. I know that in terms of the red light program, now granted, this is just talking about speed today and what the existing numbers we have, but we still do have studies out for the red light program at different intersections throughout the city. That one is not one that we have being studied. We could. I'm sure the vendor would do that for us.
I don't want to slow this work down, but I would be interested in knowing, which would have a better safety effect, having a red light camera at this intersection or a speed camera, because I do personally experience a lot more red light running. I think the speeding is worse at the nighttime hours when there's less traffic on the roads.
I think it might be best for me to talk with Zach Bradley and the traffic engineering team to see what they think was best in terms of that question, if you don't mind.
Sure. Great. Otherwise, I'm fully supportive, so just let us know what you need to help move this forward. Thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
So my question is, Chief, there's a lot of public interest in this and some degree of public pressure to do more intersections, more situations. Just want to make sure that folks understand, our limitations, that it can only be done in certain locations, number one. And number two, from what I hear you say, you would like to not take on too much in the early stages of this until we see, what the cost is going to be associated with the screening of the videos that are going to be taken by these cameras. Is that essentially what you would tell somebody who says, gee, we just need to automate speed and traffic light enforcement in the city?
Yes. Number one, it goes back to legitimacy and trust. I mean, I believe anybody wants anyone in this community wants their police department to stand on a good foundation of legal ground when they're enforcing the law. And what is reasonable, fair, and legal is what we examine with each and every location and within the bounds of this legislation. And if you look at all of the other school zones, we have a difficult time justifying that at this time. And with this scope of the legislation is very narrow. You only have it in a school zone, you only have it at a certain time, and we still have to have, which makes reasonable sense, an officer that has to review each and every one of them. And if you look at the footprint of Falls Church, it's much different than Fairfax County, even Arlington County and Fairfax City that we've been kind of paralleling. The topography of our streets and or some of the practices of what we do to ensure student safety, as Letty had said in the beginning of the meeting, that's our number one priority. But we shut down streets completely for opening and closing of schools, particularly around Oak Elementary School. The topography alone at Jesse Thackeray, the narrowness of the street, the parking of the street doesn't really make for a street that these would be a viable option. Mount Daniel, the legalities of, half most of that street being Fairfax County into Falls Church, that poses some issues. And along with Haycock, we have some zoning issues with school boundaries. We also have all that construction. And again, that's another location during going and coming from school that we stop traffic completely. So it doesn't make for some of the best zones. I would agree with Mr. Snyder, who had stated last week with HOV, we're going to get a lot more traffic on our roadways, and Broad is going to be one of them. And I think so. This is a good option. I think it gives us an opportunity to expand our program with legitimacy, rather than trying to do too much at once and not being able to responsibly take on another location at this time. And at the same time, as I had said, we have other studies out there for additional red lights. So I think we're doing it in a responsible pace.
Okay, thank you. At the mayor's permission, I'd just like to ask one other question.
Of course.
This may seem a little out of left field, but sometimes some of the more interesting ideas come from places you don't expect. I was reading online, one fellow who posted, he said, the way to slow the traffic down is to reverse the kind of path that we've been on, which is to synchronize all of our lights. And if we don't have those lights synchronized, then traffic obviously is going to be stopping choppier, as they go down Broad Street, especially Washington too. And, it occurred to me, we've spent a fair amount of time here. When are we going to get, the traffic signals synchronized? Well, why would we want them synchronized if one of the biggest problems that we identify is it's not that people can't get through town, but that people are blowing through town a whole lot faster than they should be? Is there anything to be said for not synchronizing the traffic signals down Broad Street?
That too, sir, I would tip my hat to Zach Bradley. I know I've heard him talk about the synchronization of lights and what that meaning is, but he would be better served in giving you that answer.
Okay, thanks.
All right, other comments? Anyone on the internet? Okay, Ms. Hardy?
Chief, when you talked about all the other school options, it prompted me to think about whether private schools would be eligible. So the one I was thinking of is Hillwood's got a couple of preschools, and I know we often experience some speeding around there. Do you know if the legislation allows for preschools to count?
You know, the city attorney might be able to speak to that. I know that he's had some work with this ordinance. I know that it may say something in the ordinance, and I'd have to look real quick because I didn't remember that off the top of my head. But I do believe there is a definition of the type of school, and it fails me to.
Mr. Mayor, I
I have
apologize.
to get,
Yeah, I apologize. I was chatting with the manager. Could I hear the question one more time, please?
Sure. Do preschools qualify under this state law?
Schools are a general term. There's very little restriction on that, but we'll get into those details if and how we move forward on this.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I guess if private ones are eligible under that definition, then I'd be interested in whether we have some eligible streets there.
That is correct. I mean, just to give you the example, City of Fairfax, one of the zones goes by a parochial school and a public school.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments? If not, Chief, we're going to let you get back to your celebration this evening. Don't get too crazy. We'll have to call the police on you. So, anyway, listen, again, thank you for taking time out of your day this evening to spend with us, and we wish you the best for your evening.
good night.
All right. Let's move on to the next item, Mr. Shields, which looks like this is the audit. And Kristen Holland, I believe, is she on the line?
That is right. And Kieran, do you want to make introductions? Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Tartar and members of the council. We have for you the city's annual comprehensive financial report for fiscal year ending as of June 30th, 2022. And this was conducted in accordance with the Code of Virginia. So the city as a reporting entity comprises of the primary government, and its component units include Falls Church City Public School and the Economic Development Authority. These financial statements have been audited by Brown Edwards and Company, a firm of licensed certified public accountants. And this annual audit is a long-drawn process that starts in June of each year, looking at the city's fiscal operations and controls that are in place. A good amount of the time is spent with the auditors and involves input from most of all departments within the city. And I want to acknowledge the immense amount of work managed by Ms. Melissa Ryman, City's Deputy Director of Finance, and her team, as well as fiscal staff from various departments that come together to provide required information to the auditors. And now I would like to introduce Ms. Kristen Holland from Brown Edwards and Company to present the highlights of the audit process here. And Kristen is joining us virtually. Kristen, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank you, everyone that's in attendance, for having the opportunity to serve the city. As mentioned, my name is Kristen Holland. I'm a senior associate at Brown Edwards and Company. I've been leading the city's audit for about 2 years, but I've been working on the audit for about 5 years. So I'm glad to finally see you all. As Kieran also said, I do want to give compliments to all of the city staff departments, not just finance. The audit is a very intensive process, so we inquire and request items from throughout the city and schools and EDA, and I really appreciate all of your hard work in that matter. So as you all may know, the audit has essentially 3 deliverables. It starts with what we call the ACFR, which is just short for Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. It also includes the internal control letter, which we call the management letter. And then it also includes a governance letter. And I'm just going to touch on each one of those 3 items in that order. So we'll start with the ACFR. And I do believe you all have PDF versions of this. I have a paper copy, so I'll try to make sure I say the PDF page number that I'm on, which is PDF meaning the top pane of the PDF. And I'll start with the transmittal letter, which is PDF page 11. This is just a general overview of the city. It outlines the different parts of the ACFR, and it's a non-financial data section of the report as prepared by Kieran and Wyatt. And it's a good thing to just read. It's a few pages as compared to a 200-page report, so it's a good place to start. Now I'm going to go to the actual opinion, which is what most people would want to see. That's on PDF page 17. Now, there were some new auditing standards that actually required all auditors to kind of revamp the audit opinion. And the biggest change is that there was some additional information added, and the opinion is now on the very first page of the report versus the last. So the most important thing comes first. And you've received an unmodified opinion. That's a clean opinion. It's the one you want. It just basically means that the financial statements are accurate in all material respects. And you'll also see at the bottom of the first page, it talks about the change in accounting principle. There's a new lease standard. I'll talk about that more in just a second. The next thing I want to go to is the MD&A. That's the Management Discussion and Analysis on PDF page 21. This is a summary prepared by Finance. It's the only part of this entire report that's comparative. So it's going to compare FY21 or 22 to FY21. It gives some great summaries of why there were changes, and it basically summarizes everything into this one area and gives you reasons for why things changed. All right, the next section of the report is the actual basic financial statements. That starts around page 43. That's going to be the actual exhibits, the government-wide and the fund statements and all of that. And I'm not going to go over that in any detail, as I know you all sometimes discuss that at other times. I do want to talk about the disclosures a little bit. To support all of those information in the first handful of exhibits is disclosures, which gives you more detail. It kind of provides policy examples. And sometimes in certain circumstances when something isn't recorded, it'll explain why it's not, as far as requirements under accounting standards, why it's not required to be reported. If you go to note 11, which I believe is PDF page 89, this is the talking about the new lease standard. Essentially, before FY22, there were two types of leases you could have. There was leases that were not recorded. They were just disclosed in the notes, so they're stuck in all the detailed information in the back. And then there was leases that were actually recorded. This new accounting standard is GASB 87, and it basically says, with very, very few exceptions, all leases now are recorded. So they do impact the statements. They show, generally speaking, an asset and a liability. Sometimes they equal each other. But it basically is to help financial statement users better understand the obligations of the city. The last portion of the report that I'll actually talk about is the compliance section that starts on PDF page 223. The first letter in that compliance section is called the Yellow Book Report. And that's the report on internal controls that are supposed to be considered in relation to the financial statements and the opinion we express. It's not an opinion on effectiveness, but it's just a required, it's a way for us to express required information as far as controls are concerned. You will see that at the bottom of that, it doesn't say that we have identified any deficiencies that would be considered material weaknesses. And then on the next page, it does mention there was non-compliance as related to the state code, and that was considering the highway maintenance testing. And if you have any questions there, I'd be glad to go over it in a moment. The next page is the uniform guidance opinion, and that means federal grant opinion. This is where we test, this particular year, we tested the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, which everybody is now calling ARPA. We also tested child nutrition. Of the test of those two programs, there was no issues found. And so this is also an opinion in a new format. So the very first page, you'll see you have an unmodified opinion. Again, it's a clean opinion, the one that you want. Actually, next, I'm going to talk about the management letter, and that's the one that's called comments on internal control. This is just where we communicate to you all the requirements of the audit to gain an understanding of internal controls. And there are basically 3 types of control issues that can arise. And any of the ones mentioned in here is considered the less severe of the 3. So nothing that rises to a material weakness issue. It's about, I think it's on the 3rd page that talks about the current year comments. There are 2 comments that you can review and let me know if you have any questions. And then the following pages discuss a couple of the prior year comments, some of which have been ongoing. However, I do want to point out that 2 of those comments have been resolved during the fiscal year 22 audit. And then the very back of that letter discusses upcoming GASB pronouncements. It's more or less applicable to finance to review and let them know what's coming up and what they need to be prepared to start new accounting standards. All right, and finally, I'm going to go over the governance letter. This is mainly boilerplate. It's required communication. Auditors are required to express these certain criteria. However, it is customized for the city situation. So the first page, you'll again see it mentions the GASB 87. This was no small feat to implement this standard. It was quite time consuming, and hats off to finance and Melissa for working through that. It added a lot of time for sure on her side and from an auditing standpoint. And then the rest of that first page talks about some sensitive estimates. Estimates, of course, can sway a figure a wide variety of ranges. That's why it gets pointed out that they are actual estimates. The second page also talks about sensitive disclosures. Those are the ones that you would, if nothing else, you'd want to review those disclosures specifically. And then we go on to talk about corrected and uncorrected misstatements. There were no corrected misstatements. There was one uncorrected misstatement related to an EDA invoice that wasn't accrued. However, because it was applicable to the prior year, the 6/30/2022 ending fund balance remained the same. There was no change to it at all. And then attached to that governance letter is a list of management representations signed by all necessary parties, both at the city and the schools. And this is just saying that during the audit, we were told and represented a handful of items, and this is management not only taking formal responsibility for those representations, but also accepting responsibility for the financial statements themselves. Okay, is there any questions?
Let's find out. Mr. Duncan?
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the hard work that this document represents. It is the underpinning of the work that we're going to discuss later on tonight, which is the construction of our annual budget. So in that spirit, I just wanted to flag a couple of the things that I thought were especially well put in this document, and then raise just a couple of questions or suggestions. On Roman numeral page 5, the paragraph says, city staff continues to encourage and facilitate discussions with developers to encourage proposals that make sense for both the developer and the city as we continue to focus on new development with the right mix of uses to strengthen, broaden, and balance our tax base. And because we have done that, on page 6, we find that the city's strong economic outlook and prudent financial policies have helped to earn and maintain the highest credit ratings of AAA from Moody's Investors, AAA from Standard & Poor's, and Fitch Ratings. The paragraph right above that notes that the city targets an unassigned fund balance of 17%, not less than 12%, and the use of the fund balance as of June 30th, 2022, the unassigned fund balance was 21.3%, so well above fund balance policy. I'm assuming that our fund balance is about the same as we head into the discussions over the next fiscal year. Just a couple other thoughts. In past years, when I've read this document, I feel, much as I'd like to take credit for everything good happening in the last 15 years when Mr. Tarter and I joined the EDA, a substantial number of redevelopment projects have occurred in the city during the last 15 years. I think that might more accurately say 20 years, because really it was the Broadway building that opened, I think, in 2003 that kicked off this new era of mixed-use development that's referred to later in the paragraph. So I might just suggest, also in some past years, I think this document has taken a shot at estimating the amount of money generated by all the projects that have come online in the past 20 years. I found that one year, I can't remember the number, but to be a eye-popping, interesting number, and it would be, I think, helpful if we had that number at hand and could include it. That's probably a staff function. I think that's all I have to say. There's a couple of typos and little things like that that I might call attention to, but all in all, it's obviously great to have management letters that are positive and audits that are clean, and we appreciate the work that everybody has done to make that possible. Thanks.
All right. Any other comments? Okay, I don't see any, so I just want to again thank you for all the fine work you've done to keep us on the straight and narrow, and you as well, Kieran. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you, Kristen.
Let's keep moving. So let's move on to our next item on the city manager's agenda, which is a briefing on the compensation study. Mr. Shields or Mr. Mason, do you want to introduce that?
Yes, good evening, Mayor Tarter and members of City Council. As indicated in the staff report that you've received, in February, the city contracted with Evergreen Solutions to conduct a comprehensive classification and compensation study. The final report was delivered on November 28th, and tonight in attendance online from the West Coast is Mr. Mark Holcomb, the project manager. He will make a brief presentation regarding the methodology used and the results achieved. He is also prepared to answer any and all questions that you may have regarding the project. Now, before turning the presentation over to Mark, I want to acknowledge the support of city staff, the finance department, HR director, deputy director Latanya Hall, and the city manager's office for their roles in the successful completion of this project. So without further ado, Mark, I see you're on.
Hello, can you all hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Perfect. And Steve, unfortunately, I'm noticing here I do not have the ability to share my screen. Is that something that can be enabled for me?
Hold on just for a second, Mark. I think we can do that.
Okay, thank you. All right, perfect. I think I am able to present now. So perfect. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for having me on today. I'm going to go through, as was just shared, a brief presentation on the information that we have here. This is the same presentation that I actually gave in person and met with employees. We came out, we shared the information there. with your employee groups as well. So we wanted to come back and essentially brief you all in this public setting here as well. So in the presentation today, what I want to talk about is I'll give a brief recap of the study goals that we had at the beginning of the engagement, and then talk through the project phases at a very high level so that you understand what were the steps that we took from the beginning of the engagement until now. We will recap a little bit of what we heard at a high level from the employee meetings. We'll talk about some of the findings that we had when we looked at your current compensation system, and then we'll touch on the market results and share our recommendations as well that we've provided already to city staff and city leadership. So with a compensation and classification study, we do have two main goals that we try to keep in mind throughout the engagement, and those are to maximize the levels of internal equity and external equity throughout all of our recommendations. And what that means is when we refer to internal equity, what we're referring to is the relationships that your positions have within the city. So if you compare two different positions in different departments who are performing work at a similar level of leadership, a similar level of complexity, etc., we would expect them to have a similar level of compensation. Same thing with the external equity. When we compare you to the market and we look at your positions, if we're to go to the outside market and find those same exact positions at other organizations in your surrounding area, we would expect you, if you have a high level of equity, to be paying approximately the same amount for those positions. And so we go through, we try to identify any areas or concerns that we have where we may be lacking in one of those two areas. And then our recommendations are designed to try to maximize both your internal and external equity. So with the project at a high level, we do go and essentially divide the project up into 4 different phases. Phase 1, the outreach phase, is all about collecting data. And so we went to your HR team and got some support from finance, I believe, as well, and asked them to really provide us a lot of different information. We asked for job descriptions, org charts, pay information on your current system, your pay plan, and employee information as well, an employee census where we asked for all sorts of data and information on the employees that you have employed right now. We also collected information from your employees directly. So we had virtual focus groups that we conducted at the beginning of the engagement where we did ask your employees questions. We asked them, what are your concerns with working for the city right now? What do you like with working for the city right now? What's keeping you here? So we really can come back and report on both some of the areas that we wanted to focus on in the study, as well as be able to provide with you some of your, the value proposition that you offer right now that your employees say, hey, we're really good at this. We like this. This is something that we're proud of or we enjoy in terms of working for your organization. We also had employees fill out a job survey on their own individual responsibilities and duties. So that information was an opportunity for your employees to tell us, what are they doing? What are their responsibilities? What are the main tasks they spend their time and energy on, so that when we do make comparisons, either internally across positions in the organization or externally to the outside market, we're able to make the most accurate comparisons possible with up-to-date data from your employees. Phase 2, the internal analysis, is really about us reviewing all of that data that we collect in phase 1. So phase 2, we look at your pay plans, we look at your current pay practices, we look at how employees are spaced inside your current pay systems as well. So you may have a good pay range and a good pay range system, but if all of your employees are in the very beginning of the pay range near the minimum of the range, that might be a concern. Likewise, if all of your employees are stuck at the maximum of the range and capped from moving any further, we may identify that as a concern as well. So those are some of the things that we looked at to really see, are there any clusters of employees throughout the range that would give us pause or that we would want to look further into. In phase 2, we also review the information that your employees submitted to us. So again, those surveys, the information they provided on their jobs and on their duties, so that we can really provide sort of an internal hierarchy of how we see positions relating to one another. We then move on to phase 3, which is the external analysis. That entailed us reaching out to peer organizations in your market, collecting data on how they administer compensation, what rates are they paying to their employees, and then making comparisons between your organization and theirs based on the duties and responsibilities that each of your positions holds. Phase 4 is then the solution phase, and so we're wrapping that phase up now with some reporting, but we did go through a number of different implementation options and recommendations that we talked to the city about and your HR and city leadership teams to essentially say, here are some different ways you can increase your internal equity or your external equity, and here are some of the pros and cons of each options. So we will come forward with a recommendation. We've already done that. And so we've got the reporting as well that, again, we provided a written report. We've met with employees and presented the findings to them, and then as well come to a public session like this and present the findings here as well. So with the employee meetings that we hosted, we did have a number of comments, and at a high level, I want to summarize some of the positive comments first, and then we'll talk about the concerns in a moment. But one of the positive comments that employees shared was about the benefits. Employees were pleased, and some employees did state that the reason they came and worked at the city is because of the benefits. Specifically, the pension plan was mentioned as an attractive benefit as well. That when we ask employees, why are you still working here? We know there's a lot of turnover in the market right now. We know it's a competitive labor market. So why have you stayed? That's one of the things that employees were quick to point out. The culture at the organization is another one. So just the people that employees work with, some of them mentioned their supervisors, some mentioned their coworkers that they're on the same team with. But again, mentioning that teamwork, mentioning the size of the city, and really understanding that, hey, if I went somewhere else, especially in our, in the metro area that you're in, there's plenty of large employers. But you understand if you go there, it may not be quite the same environment that you get to know the people you work with, you get to know the people that you work for. And so that small size environment of the city, employees were quick to point out they did enjoy that. The work-life balance was the last one, and this would primarily be employees expressing gratitude for the flexible work that they have, but also stating that, hey, I know I could probably go to the private sector if I wanted to grind away and make every single dollar that I could possibly make in my paycheck. But, we've got a work-life balance here that I wouldn't be able to achieve there. I'd be working more nights, I'd be working more weekends, and so the work-life balance was something employees were aware of. With that being said, certainly there were some concerns shared as well. And so one of the concerns that employees did state was in respect to external equity. So employees were concerned about how they compared to the market. So surrounding cities and counties in your area. Certainly everybody in your area deals with some high cost of living numbers. And so employees sitting there saying, look, if I'm having to pay this much for rent, if I'm having to pay this much for gas, for groceries, for everything that I'm trying to purchase, I need to have a competitive salary, or else I'm going to be forced to go somewhere else for a higher paying salary, whether I want to or not. The external equity was something employees mentioned a lot. The turnover was also mentioned. That, again, we understand every organization is dealing with turnover right now. So it's not to say that the turnover at your city is necessarily any worse than it is elsewhere, but employees are still feeling the effect of the turnover in their departments and their areas. And so some employees did share that, hey, I used to have somebody working with me, and now they've left, and I'm filling the position. I'm doing all of the work because we don't have someone else in my department. Some other people might say, hey, I had somebody leave. Now we have a new person. They're not as good as the person who's been here for 10 years or 15 years, not because they're not a good worker, but because they're brand new. They're still learning, and that does place a burden on the incumbents you already have, who have to train or who have to pick up the slack until a newer employee, comes up to speed. So that was a little bit of the concern employees shared as well. Some of them shared that as well. And then employees did share, many employees mentioned sort of that the job descriptions they didn't think were up to date. They really felt, hey, we'd like to see the job descriptions updated and really provide some more clarity on the roles that I'm providing or performing now. And so those job surveys that we collected from employees will be used. I'll just state that now because we have that concern. We will be using that to update the job descriptions, to make recommendations for you all about how you can improve those job descriptions. So definitely wanted to be able to address that. With respect to your current pay structure and pay system right now, you have done a pretty good job of spacing employees in your current pay ranges. So we didn't find a significant amount of compression in your pay ranges right now, which is not to say there's none, but it is to say that, again, overall, you've done a pretty good job of addressing employee compression and moving employees through your pay ranges over time. We did see that the employees who are typically towards the maximum of the range are those employees who have been with the city the longest. Typically speaking, those who are closest to the minimum of the range, the ones who have just started, which again, in general, is what you like to see. Definitely there's some variation that you might find where you have a high performer or you have somebody who came in with outside experience of a significant degree somewhere else. They may be a brand new hire and they're paid at the midpoint. So examples like that can happen. But in general, we typically like to see the employees who've been there longer further progress in the pay ranges. Now, that being said, we did find some areas where you do have a significant number of employees at the beginning of your pay scales. So in quartile ones, for the most part, those are newer employees. So I don't mean to say that the employees in quartile one, which is the basically the section of the pay plan closest to the minimum of the pay range, I don't mean to say those employees aren't quote unquote supposed to be there. But what we do want to point out is those employees in quartile one are typically the employees most at risk to leave your organization. Because if you're making the minimum pay at your organization now or close to it, you may not feel like you have anything to lose by looking for a higher salary elsewhere. Alternatively, if you've already advanced to the midpoint in your range or you've advanced close to the maximum of your range, you may decide, hey, if I leave and if I come back, I may not get the same salary if I came back, or I may not be able to find the same high salary somewhere else. So again, just wanting to point that out, not that it's a major hole, but it is something to be aware of. So when we went out to the market, we did make comparisons to 13 different organizations. And so you've got cities, towns, and counties from your immediate surrounding area, and then a few just a little bit further around. Most of them obviously come from the state, but a few come from Maryland as well. So sort of stretching right around that metro area that you all compete in. We did try to pick organizations that would have some overlap in the jobs and services that you provide. We completely understand that looking at some of those counties, looking at some of those other, looking at some of those other organizations that you see there, they are going to be larger and they're going to have certain positions that are going to be working at a higher scope and scale. But that being said, when we look to the market, what we're trying to do is match those positions that are operating at a similar level. And so it may be that we would match a supervisor to a manager if we felt that the scope of supervision and management was similar between two organizations. With entry-level positions, we certainly may be matching one-to-one. You may look at an administrative assistant in your organization versus one of the counties, the larger organizations. The duties and responsibilities may be identical or very close to it. And so again, we do make individualized custom matches between every organization to make sure we're appropriately matching for the duties and responsibilities performed. We did adjust for cost of living differentials. So again, understanding some of the organizations, particularly those closest to sort of that DC, that metro, downtown area where you are going to be higher. There are some of the organizations getting a little bit further south or west that maybe aren't quite as expensive to live in and wouldn't have the same cost of living. And the last thing I want to point out here is we did look at 62 different positions. There was an average match count of about 8.5 matches per position. So again, what that means is we didn't look at every one of these 13 peers and make the statement that, hey, we have to find a match at each of them. We took the matches that we felt were appropriate based on the work performed. If we looked at an organization and said, hey, they don't have a matching position, or maybe the only position they would have works at a higher or lower level than what you have in your organization, then we didn't have to make that match. So we do believe that the market, essentially market position that we're sharing is accurate based on the duties and responsibilities of your positions. So with that being said, here is that market information that we have. Your unadjusted results, so essentially not looking at cost of living, you're at about 0 or almost 1% below the market at the minimum, and about 5 or 6% below the market when you get to the midpoint and maximum. When you adjust the results for cost of living, you will see you fall a little bit further behind. So about 2% behind at the minimum, and about 6 to 7 to almost 8% behind towards the midpoint and the maximum. And so again, what that identifies is, you're in a relatively strong position overall, but maybe slightly below what some of your peers have done over the past couple years. Again, not a major cause for concern, but definitely something that can be tweaked a little bit. This does show the average market position of your 62 benchmark positions that we looked at. And so what that means is some positions are going to return a worse market rate than what we're showing. Some positions will return a better market rate than what we're showing. And so not every single position came back with the same results. But you did see on average that your organization was slightly trailing the market. So given that the recommendations that we found, given what we saw, we are recommending a few key adjustments. So number one, we are recommending an adjusted pay plan. We are recommending a pay plan with 23 unique grades with a range spread of 70% to match the market, and a progression of 6% between grades. And so what that will do is it'll provide you a nice, consistent structure where every single grade is the same width from minimum to maximum, and the grades each move up, from grade 1 to 2 to 3, just essentially moving through the system at a rate of 6%. So you do have a very a very consistent approach, rather, and you can assign pay grades in the second bullet there in a custom manner to individual positions. Get assigned to the pay grade that is most appropriate based on their internal equity and market results. And so what that means is some positions will see a larger adjustment and some positions will see a smaller adjustment. If your midpoint of your pay range right now is $55,000 and your market results that came back is $57,000, you obviously don't need that large of an adjustment or an increase. We wanted to provide a custom approach. So again, that employee in that example grade, they may move up slightly with their pay range, but they don't need the same adjustment as an employee whose average midpoint right now is $55,000 and the market results was $65,000. They obviously would be in a bigger market differential. There would be some more competitive pressure from your peers, and we would therefore typically recommend that position to go further. So we did assign pay grades to your positions based on those market results, but also based on the results of the internal analysis that we did. The average change across your positions was 7.1%. And so again, keeping in mind, and I think that's at the midpoint, keeping in mind at the midpoint right now, you're about 5% below the midpoint. So this adjustment here will put you just slightly ahead of the midpoint on average, basically accounting for a little bit of movement from your peers. We are seeing a lot of peers doing sort of a mid-year, half percentage increase just to give a little bit of an increase, so they don't have to wait 12 months in this competitive labor market. And so when we assign positions, again, we did move your positions just slightly further than that market gap that we found on average. Now, everything I've talked about thus far has been the pay structure and the pay grade assignments for positions, but then you have to determine how employees would be placed into their newly recommended pay grades. Because if you move a pay grade by 10%, but an employee is still within that new pay grade, if they were at the midpoint before and you move the pay grade by 10%, the employee is still going to be above that minimum of the pay grade. So you don't technically have to move them, but what you do is you want to look at a few different options to see which option best aligns with the goals of the city. And what we proposed, and we went through a number of different choices with your human resources and city management team. And what we came up with and what we're recommending is the hybrid parity approach. And so what the hybrid parity approach does is it actually reviews every single person individually. It looks at where they would, quote unquote, expect to be in their pay range based on the number of years they have in their position and the number of years they've spent with the city in total, which is the hybrid. It's a hybrid of time in position and time at the organization as a whole. And it adjusts employees based on that metric. And so the nice thing about the hybrid approach is it spends your dollars in the places where they're needed without spending a ton of excess money where you don't have to make an adjustment. So if you have an employee who's at the midpoint or above the midpoint, they've already moved a large percent of the way through their range, we don't necessarily see them and think, hey, they have to move again. They have to move more. They have to get an additional adjustment from what the city's already done earlier this year. So instead, it would look at an employee and say, hey, this employee's at the minimum of the range, for example, but they've been at the city or the organization for 10 years. We would typically expect them to be further progressed than the minimum of the range. And so it would provide an adjustment for those employees. So this is a very targeted approach. And what it also lets you do is make the statement that as of this implementation, every employee within the city is making at least their expected hybrid parity salary. We did not decrease anybody who came in above their recommendation. If you're making $60,000 and your recommendation is $58,000, we do not decrease you by $2,000, but instead you keep your current salary. So therefore, again, everyone in the city would be making at least their recommended hybrid parity salary with this implementation. So that's the information I wanted to share. Just wanted to run through a dozen slides or so real quick with you to make sure that we did overview the major findings from the study. So Steve, I see you step back up there. Any questions or anything else that you want to add or that you think I should address in more detail?
All right. Thank you very much for that thorough presentation. A lot of good information in there. I know we do have some questions. Why don't we start with Ms. Hiscott?
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I have just one question to start off on Exhibit 4B. It's page 4-3. It's on the cost of living index and comparing us to market peers. And I see that the City of Falls Church cost of living index is 121.1, which is exactly the same as Fairfax County. Was brought to my attention by somebody else, and I started looking into it. And just by going online, you can find rates in Falls Church City of 155, so it's significantly above that. And I know you did a chart of with cost of living and without cost of living. There are different calculations there, but I'm imagining if we looked at, we know it costs more to live in the City of Falls Church than just Falls Church in Fairfax County, for instance, just based on purely on property assessment alone. Can you walk me through why you all chose to use the same as Fairfax County versus, what we've seen online as a higher rate?
Sure. So there's multiple ways you can break down cost of living, and we do have different metrics that we'll use from time to time. The metric that we use most often, and the one that we used in this case, is data provided by the Council for Community and Economic Research. And so that's a major, well-respected, cost of living provider across the country. They have provided data to many, companies that operate across the country, as well as to the federal government. And so what they do is they look at a basket of goods and services to really see what is the actual cost of living in a certain area. In that basket of goods and services are things like the cost of healthcare, the cost of housing, the cost of transportation. It does dig into individual items such as gasoline, a gallon of milk, things of that nature. And so what they do is they actually group together, typically at the county level. And this was a question that an employee asked during the session, so we actually went back and looked to double check. And because, again, in the state of Virginia, you will have independent cities operating alongside counties, they do sometimes group cities and counties together that are adjacent or adjoining. And so what we did find in this case is they actually group together Falls Church and Fairfax. So it is going to come out with the exact same number because you were looked at together. Now, that being said, when I talk about the rationale of using an approach like that, We do think that there is some validity of actually looking at a little bit broader cost of living number as opposed to just looking at the numbers from within your city limits for a couple reasons. Number one is that the employment base that you're looking at, we do want to localize that. We certainly want to understand that your employees either can be or should be able to be living somewhat locally. But that being said, we know not every single employee in your organization lives in your immediate area. Obviously, with the smaller geographic footprint of Falls Church, certainly, even if you're looking at the price of gasoline and groceries and things of that nature, childcare, you wouldn't be restricted to just the cost within your area. So if you do look within a smaller geographic area, you are prone to having some more wild swings in the cost of living. And I think that the 155 number you mentioned, while we do see numbers that high in some cases, again, that would be a more major swing in the cost of living. So ultimately, to sum up, essentially what I would say is there's nothing wrong, quote unquote, with looking at things in that way. It's a decision that you would have to make. But we do feel very comfortable saying that looking at you, in combination with a surrounding or an adjacent county, does provide a valid and true look at the data. You could divide the data up differently, which it sounds like from a different source you've done. That would be an alternative look. But we are comfortable, again, with the data that was provided from the Council of Community and Economic Research. Does that address sort of the question?
Yeah, I guess it brings up more questions in my mind that are philosophical questions that if we want to house within Falls Church city limits, many of our employees, housing is the biggest factor. It's the biggest driver in the cost of living in Falls Church City. So I am curious, if you were to use those other figures, what that means. If we are trying to entice our employees to live in Falls Church City and the cost of living driven mostly by housing were higher, where do we fall within that metric? Like if you reran your model at a higher rate, what would that result in terms of percent off?
We did look at that, and it does put you a little bit further below market. So exactly what you said is the right way to phrase it. As a philosophical decision, if you decided we want to base this so that everyone would be able to live within the city limits, it would require an additional adjustment. Again, that was not the philosophical decision we made, but that is an alternative that you could consider.
And do you have a rough idea as that additional 5%, obviously housing is only one component. If you had a differentiation, maybe even midpoint between 155 and 121, and you reran that model, I'd be interested to know roughly what that means. So we just are, regardless of the decision we make and pay, we have an understanding of what that means in terms of who can live in the city and who can't.
Right. It was roughly 12 to 15%. I believe it was somewhere in that range. So again, it would be a little more than a 10% adjustment essentially across the board. I think about 12 to 15% would be the number.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you. A couple questions. Did you compare the fringe benefits packages? Because as we know, compensation is salary, but it's also fringe benefits like health, retirement, et cetera. Tell me what your comments are there.
We did look at benefits as well, and we did find you to be relatively comparable across the board. We have taken a little bit further look because I know we had some comments from some of your benefit staff that felt, again, just like employees shared, that the pension actually is a little bit above and beyond even what the market shows and maybe a competitive advantage. So that is something that we did see somewhat of, but benefits are not quite as clear-cut of a comparison as salaries, where you can say everybody would prefer a $57,000 salary to a $55,000 salary. We know that. That's straight across the board. But when you look at benefits, there's a little bit more nuance. And so we do tend to be a little bit more conservative in saying, you're X percent better in terms of monetary value. But we did feel very comfortable, and we do have a chapter in the report that details benefits and talks about the fact that we believe your benefits are comparable to your market peers.
Is it possible they're better?
It is. In certain areas, again, like the pension that we just mentioned, they are better. In certain areas, they do exceed the market. In certain areas, they're a little bit below, I believe. But again, it's sort of each employee is going to utilize their benefits a little bit differently. Some people are going to take family health care. Some people are going to take individual health care. Some people are going to take dental and vision and utilize those. Some are not. And so again, it's a little bit more of a nuanced discussion versus saying a higher salary is always going to be better. And with benefits, it will impact people differently. But yes, there are some benefits you have that are above and beyond what the market offers.
Mr. Snyder, if I might, Mr. Snyder, if I might say, Benefits Manager Sherry Davidson did a deep dive in regards to our benefits, and we'll be able to share that information with you. But she did find that overall our benefits are comparable, if not better, than a lot of different other organizations in the area.
Yeah, so my only point is that salary is one element to look at in terms of overall employee compensation. Second question is the cost of living. If an employee doesn't actually live in the city of Falls Church, did you look at the cost of living where they actually live as opposed to the cost of living in the city of Falls Church?
So we did not adjust individual employees based on the cost of living of their location for a couple different reasons. Number one, we didn't take the data I'm not sure, maybe your, HR probably has that information. We did not collect that from them. So we didn't collect addresses and we didn't adjust individual employees for that. But number two, that would create somewhat of an equity issue, where you look at, hey, we're paying this employee a different rate than that employee because they live in two different locations. So while they would experience a different cost of living, essentially.
I'm going somewhere else with that. I'm trying to figure out, you took the cost of living in Falls Church is X, cost of living in Loudoun County is Y.
Correct.
And because our cost of living may be higher than others, you're building that into the recommendation. But I'm saying how relevant is that to employees if they're in fact not paying the higher cost of living here?
Right. So that's one of the reasons why we're more comfortable going with a cost of living approach that is a little bit more, regionalized and at least, groups you with a larger area, as opposed to doing such a precise and specific comparison of your city limits only. That's exactly what our logic is. You do have to make a little bit of an assumption. And so again, when you adjust for cost of living, you're always going to have some people who would say, well, this doesn't apply to me as much because I commute and I drive in from, Maryland or West Virginia or Southern, in the state of Virginia. That's always possible.
Right.
But we did not adjust individual employees or positions differently. We essentially did take everyone and we adjusted each match we received. So Loudoun County received one adjustment. Fairfax, I guess, wouldn't have received an adjustment. Someone from Montgomery County would have received a third adjustment, et cetera. But it was consistent.
Thanks. A question for Mr. Mason. To what extent are we analyzing productivity of employees? In other words, we heard tonight again where the leaf pickup is delayed, where we've had to hire private contractors. And yet in the past, city staff did it far more expeditiously than is being done now. So my question is to Mr. Mason, the salaries are all very interesting and very relevant and important, but how about productivity? And are we analyzing productivity in the different departments?
Well, excuse me. Productivity and workload are extremely important. And our next step after completing the classification and compensation study is to now look at the next study, which will be our staffing study. And that'll tell us. Now, in the case of DPW, recently they were struck with some serious illnesses, so that's why they're a little bit behind. But we are going to be conducting a staffing study as a result of completing the classification and compensation study.
Okay. What I'm interested in is productivity, not only by department, but by individual. Thank you.
Ms. Leon?
So, Mr. Holcomb, a couple of questions on the data gathering aspect or the phase of your work. What percentage of staff did you interview in person?
So we did our focus groups. I believe they were virtual sessions, and we sent out invitations. And Steve, I think, got this question last week. He can touch on that a little bit more on how it was communicated to staff. But we sent an open invitation that staff were able to respond to and join with to attend those virtual focus group sessions. And so I don't know the exact percentage, Steve. I don't know if we had that percentage, but I know we did send out that invitation sort of in an open-ended manner to staff. If you had anything else you want to add to that.
I don't have the exact number of employees that participated.
Okay.
I hope it's a substantially enough population to drive the data coming out of it. I'd just be curious to know, right?
Well, employees also completed job analysis questionnaires as well. So that drove some of the information as well.
How many people completed the questionnaire?
Now that, I don't have that number. Mark, you might have that.
I will see if I've got it right in front of me here. We do have that. If I don't have it right here, I can definitely get it. But let me see if I'm going to try to pull up this report, and let me see if it will download here.
These are just relevant numbers for me to try to understand where your stakeholder outreach was and how much of staff was heard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that the communication was wide to all city employees, and the
I believe that.
yes, and the meetings were held in various times to try to capture as many of the employees as we could, whether it was early morning, afternoon, or late in the afternoon as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So we received responses from 136 different employees during the JAT period, which represented about 70% of all classifications.
That's a high number for people returning a survey. Okay.
Absolutely.
So I'm still
yes.
curious how many actually showed up in person, because I think those are two relative numbers, if you could take that as a follow-up. So Mr. Mason, when I take a look at this 23 level comp structure, I'd love to hear your thoughts about how hard or easy is that to implement. It's larger than I expected. I expected pay grades, but 23. I'm just curious what your thoughts are as the professional.
Well, we currently have 30.
So this is a reduction.
So
that's
this
the context
is a
for everybody.
reduction,
Okay.
and positions have been, the right word is not compressed, but Mark and his team can explain a little bit more in regards to how we went from 30 down to 23. Mark?
Sure. So we did consolidate some pay grades from your current system to your new. And so what we did, the way we actually come up with that 23 grade structure is we look at a couple different factors. Number one is when we look at the market, we look at what is the minimum pay range that we need to be able to capture. And for you to be able to compete with your entry level positions, where do we need to start that structure? We also then look at what is the maximum of the market that you need to compete in. So how high do we need to go with that structure? And then we build out, again, in this case, a very consistent and equitable structure, just going up 6% per. And so we really saw that at the bottom of your ranges, the lowest paid positions in the organization we needed to hit was a little more than $17 an hour, and then again the top range went all the way up to those directors above 100,000, and we sort of spaced positions at a 6% rate between them to get us up there. So a larger organization sometimes would have more grades because they need to differentiate more between positions, but the 23, as I think has already been mentioned, was a consolidation, and we didn't want to do anything too drastic by consolidating too much. Taking you down too low. We felt 23 was an appropriate reduction from the 30 you had
So
currently.
it streamlines it for you.
Mhm.
All right.
Does.
So I think my overall, overall reaction to this, I think we fundamentally have to think about where do we envision ourselves as the employer of choice, right? It's good evidence to have that, we've got some work to do if we're going to meet a market midpoint, right? We definitely have to make a commitment to that. But I think fundamentally, I just want to ask us to consider, is that sufficient to be at market midpoint, right? And personally, I would like us to think beyond that and be above market midpoint. So I think we have to think about making a very strong commitment. And I know salaries aren't everything, but it is an important competitive factor given that our fringe benefits, according to this survey, are pretty good. I mean, where else are you going to go to compete if your benefits are great, right? Because that's a translation that I received when I read this full report. So I just want us to, hoping I get other council members to kind of support the concept of not just meeting the middle, but just exceeding that, right, and commitment to that. The other thing that that really resonated with me was the notion of pay per performance. It was last page, second to last page, where it was embedded that we should commit to cost of living adjustments, but also add more, right, based on high performance. So huge accolades to that concept. I think merit-based, rewards is where we need to go, and I was really appreciative to see that cited here. So, thank you.
Ms. Hardy?
Thanks. I was glad that my colleagues went first because I also had questions about the COLA that Ms. Hiscott did, as well as the response rate data that Ms. Leon did. To build on this, number one, thank you for this report. It's very thorough, and I appreciated reading it. I liked having both the qualitative feedback we heard from employees as well as the quantitative. On the qualitative note, though, besides knowing the response rate for that job survey, I do think it's also useful to know the number of people that showed up to the sessions and whether it was representative of all departments and seniority, just to kind of get a sense of, are we skewed in one way or another? So when you have that information, Mr. Mason, I think that would be terrific to have. So the bottom line report is that, if I remember from this correctly, we're 2% below market minimum for the ranges, 5% below midpoint, or for the midpoint ranges, and then 7% below at the max end of each salary grade. That's kind of the rough conclusion. Is that correct, Mr. Holcomb?
That's approximately the numbers, yes.
Okay. And I think the main risk that I think you've cited in your report is that if that's the case, we probably do a decent job bringing people into each grade, but we probably are at risk of losing our top performers. And so I think that's kind of a blind spot we need to watch out for. And I know that obviously the recommendations here try to adjust for that, but that is something that I want to make sure my colleagues understand is if we are 7% below at the top end of each grade, that's when you start losing your high performers, right? Because they're at the max of what that grade is before they get promoted. And I think anecdotally, we're seeing some examples of that. So I think that's something that I want to make sure we address. So I'm supportive of the recommendations. I think Ms. Leon brought up a good point around what is our broader compensation philosophy, right? Are we okay at midpoint? Is it something we should shoot for above higher? I really like the language she used around being the employer of choice. So being a small jurisdiction, obviously the organization is going to be flatter than other places. And so what does it mean to be employer of choice? What is that total compensation philosophy we have? I would like to see the outcome of the staffing level study paired with the salary study, because I think the combination of the two is informative to figure out what our compensation philosophy in general is. Like if it, for example, if it concludes that we need to add staff in certain places, obviously that will have budgetary impacts, and I think that's part of it. But I do think that's an important conversation for us to have for general government. Couple other questions. So based on the recommendations that the $263,000 that we would need this year to implement the recommendations and the 58 employees that it impacts, is that for certain, do we see trends in certain departments and again seniority where the employees are most impacted, or is it spread across the 200 some employees we have?
We do see a couple of departments that have a high impact, but in a variety of different departments, though we do see, but there are a couple of departments that we do see there is a little bit of a high impact.
Okay. And then on benefits, I did read that whole chapter that kind of talked about how competitive our benefits were. I'd also be interested when you mentioned that Sherry has done some analysis. There's some emerging benefits that I'm a big fan of, like a really good parental leave policy. I believe it's really important as our organization grows to think about how to care for the entire employee. And that means, taking care of them when they have, changes in their family structure. So I'd love to know whether we're analyzing that as well, because I really only saw health and dental and retirement benefits listed in the report.
We did analyze that, and 2 years ago, we increased our parental leave from 2 weeks to 6 weeks. And we're looking at possibly increasing that further, but also in regards to multi-generational situations, we're also looking at extending that not just for new parents, but also for those employees that are having to care for individuals like parents, et cetera, in their homes.
Yeah, no, I love that broadening of definition because I think more and more of us are in that sandwich generation. So thank you for thinking through that. When you have the report, I think we'd love to see it. And my final comment is similar to Caroline's also. I did note with interest in page 6-6, the merit-based kind of compensation. It's something that I've grown up with in other organizations, and I think it's something that I would like to see and discuss more on how we could make that happen. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I've got a question or two for you. So in terms of your goal, it was to be at the exact midpoint, like in other words, like a statistical average of the various jurisdictions you used. Is that right? For our compensation?
That's correct.
So the number was basically take everybody else's average at whatever that average is. That's what we're seeking. If we wanted to go above that, would that information be easy for you to pass on to us? In other words, it's all, I presume, in your database. And so if we said as a goal not to be the statistical average of all this basket of jurisdictions, but we actually wanted to be above that. For example, our schools strive to be among the top compensators, not just the middle of the pack. If we were to do that, I don't know if any of that data is sort of at your fingertips, but how that might impact some of these numbers. For example, instead of being at the 50 percentile, maybe at the 75 percentile. How just do you have an eyeball, just a ballpark number of how that might impact things? Or is that something that would take additional work to come up with some of those numbers and information?
I don't have that number in front of me, but we did do a 70% exercise. So we do have that information that we can share with you.
What is that, just roughly, if you have it at your fingertips?
Steve, I'm pulling it up now.
Oh, thanks, Mark.
And this is a little bit of an older database because when we finalized and went to the newer database, we did we didn't update this data with that, but it looks like the cost would be a little bit more than $500,000 to do the same hybrid parity approach. So it would maybe not quite double. Actually, I guess it is about double. No, excuse me. From going to the 50th to the 70th percentile, you're at about 260 something now. It's a little more than $500,000 there. So it'd be about double the cost to go to the 70th percentile. And then again, 75th would add a tiny bit to that, but not significantly more than the 70th that we calculated.
I mean, I, for one, would be interested in seeing that curve. I don't know if you could plot that curve out for us. In other words, 50 on up to whatever the number goes to and what that number would be in terms of total cost on an annual basis.
We could definitely provide that. Let me take a note on that, and we will go ahead and provide that information, Steve, to you, and you can share it with them.
Okay. In respect to getting back to merit pay, we had some discussion about that just a moment ago. My recollection in past in the city was that everybody basically earned it. Is that incorrect recollection of mine that, in past years it was sort of merit to me kind of means you differentiate. In the past, has it basically been essentially all employees got the merit pay bumps or increases?
It was not a COLA, strictly speaking, because if you were on a performance improvement program, then you would not receive it the way you would if it was strictly a cost of living. So it was truly a merit pay, but generally speaking, the vast majority of employees would get that. I mean, it would be a very small number on any year of employees that would not get it.
And let me ask our compensation expert, is that how it generally works, merit pay, or is it more, some percentage get it?
So most organizations, while they might pay some, call it lip service to doing merit, et cetera, it is a little bit more rare to see a truly well-done merit system. They do exist, and organizations do have them, but I would say the majority, so if we're looking at, what is the largest percentage of your peers, what are they doing? I would say it's typically going to be an across-the-board or a very light merit system where almost everybody would get the same thing, and you may do some small deviations for the top performers or the bottom performers. But I do think, again, as to echo the comments that have been made by a couple, members already, a well-done merit system does have plenty of defined advantages. It can be done well, but I wouldn't say that most of your peers are likely doing that, having a system such as that.
But a well-defined, or what you would consider a good merit pay system, does almost everybody get it? Or is that, it's sort of counterintuitive to me that this notion that a merit pay would be essentially everyone gets it?
Right. A merit pay would, if it's a well-defined system, what you'll typically do is you can think of it sort of like a bell curve where everybody will get something if they're a solid performer, but you absolutely want to have some deviation where your top performers get more. And so just to throw out some numbers, if you give most people a 3%, you'd want to have, hey, my top performers can get 5% or whatever. And if you kind of showed up, you did your job, you were okay, but I wouldn't really say you kept up with the average, you might get 1 or 2%. That's how a merit system would work if you're really trying to differentiate performance. Because while it is only a 2 or 3% difference in 1 year, high performers would absolutely see the gains of that over time if you had a robust merit system in place.
Got it. Ms. Connolly?
Thanks, Mayor Charter, and thank you, Mark, for all that information, and my colleagues for asking all those questions. Now, when I read this, I thought you were recommending going to more of a regular step and grade system, not a merit system. So maybe I missed something, but that was kind of what I thought I saw. So that's one question. And then my second question is, as we've talked about this, we said we have funding in the current year's budget to get us to the midpoint. And now, as Mayor Charter and others are asking about going above the midpoint, is this the kind of thing that could be implemented over several years? And does that then get you behind as you're talking about regular hygiene and making sure that your grades are, that it's correct? Mm-hmm. How much does it affect the reliability of the numbers if you decide, well, let's do this over several years because it's such a large number?
So definitely two good questions. To the first one, and let me think back. So the first question was, okay, so step and grades. So no, we're certainly not recommending a defined step and grade system. What we did recommend is that you look at increases in a couple different ways. So the first way that you do need to look at increases is to adjust for cost of living. Because essentially, and I think actually this year is probably the easiest year to make the statement with how high inflation has been. Everybody here recognizes if you're making $50,000 now and you were making $50,000 last year, you're making less money because the cost, the inflation that has moved past you. And so that's what we're saying is in normal years, again, not when it's a 9% inflation or similar. You should be increasing employees to account for that inflation so that they're not losing ground over time. So even for an average performer, we would say they should be outpacing inflation slightly to account for their experience. But then your high performers, again, you'd want to give them something a little bit above and beyond that. So that's what we were proposing. There would be, in our recommended system, an increase for all employees each year as long as they hit certain minimum thresholds. But then those who go above and beyond will get more. With respect to the other question of what if we decide to essentially move a little bit further or be a little bit more aggressive to move beyond the market, you absolutely could implement a system like that over multiple years. Some organizations even say, we're going to implement this part in January and then the next part in July. So it doesn't even have to be multiple years. It could be 2 pieces in 1 year. But you certainly could look at doing a system like that, and we're certainly happy to help model that. What I would say is let's pretend then you did a 2 or 3 year implementation so we can answer the question of, are you behind the market then? The answer there is no as well, because we do project what the market movement is likely to be for those couple years. So you're right. If we were to take the number today and just divide it by 3 years, in 3 years when you got there, you would be essentially matching the market from 3 years in the past. And so one of the things we do is we build in a projected increase based on what we think the market will do each year. But that's something where we'll engage with your HR and we would make a recommendation to them each year. If we projected a movement of 3% and the market moved 5%, we'd have that conversation over time and provide that support. So definitely a fair question.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you very much.
So I guess my fundamental question is, since the report seems to be supporting kind of an automatic pay increase, how do we know that that's going to solve the problem and generate better public services for the taxpayers?
So what the report is recommending is that your employees who perform their jobs, who live up to that minimum qualification or minimum standard that you have for them, they would advance at least at the rate of inflation or slightly above the rate of inflation. So again, we're not recommending 5, 6, 7% increases for employees who are just showing up and doing their job. That is something that your organization would have to maintain, and any organization has to maintain over time, is a minimum standard of performance. And so certainly we're not trying to give any sort of impression that if an employee shows up and does not meet standards, they should be kept around and given an increase. We are making an assumption that there is, a desire to improve and a minimum qualification that they hit each year. But again, I would say, and I think given the conversations that I've had with your employees, albeit a little bit at a surface level of sitting with them for an hour and having the conversations, I didn't get the impression that people are showing up and don't care and don't want to do a good job. So again, our statement would be those employees who are showing up, who are working hard and doing their best, they would typically see some level of increase. Those employees who maybe have that additional gear of hard work or maybe some additional qualifications or talent or experience that can help, they may get a little more. And those employees who don't meet standards would get less or nothing, or again, could be dealt with separately.
Mr. Snyder, may I was going to say also in support of both the classification and compensation study, as well as our diversity to belonging report, HR has now spearheaded the creation of 4 new groups of city employees. One will be for, it's called the Benefits Action Team. We have one that's going to be the new employee welcome team. We have for compensation, the Compensation Alliance Task Force. And for employee development, we have the Learning, Education, and Development team as well. So we got a lot of response from employees in regards to wanting to be a part of these groups. And we'll be sending that information out to all employees in regards to where we're going with those teams.
All right. So it's getting late. We haven't started actually technically the business on the agenda just yet. Mr. Shields, is there any action you want from us right now?
So we will follow up with council on the discussion about the kind of the point in terms of market competitiveness that we should shoot for as an organization. I think one thing that I would just add to that conversation, I think it is a really important conversation for us to have. When you are a small organization, you might have one engineer who runs the entire stormwater program. And so when you have a vacancy in that position, the entire program stops for 6 months or more while you start it up again. In any department that we have, generally they're small teams. And so, even of our biggest teams, a platoon on the police department, you lose one officer and you're down 25%. And so retention and hiring quality people is, I think, something that is a higher premium in a smaller jurisdiction like ours than it is in a larger jurisdiction. In Fairfax County, you could have a team of 100 and you lose one person, and that's 1% of the program impact. So we look forward to that discussion. And I think probably this is the most in-depth discussion with the governing body we've ever had on compensation, and I think it's very positive, and look forward to continuing that discussion with you.
All right, thank you all, Mr. Mason and our consultants as well, Mr. Holcomb. This has been very enlightening and informative for us. I think there's more to do, more to talk about, but we thank you for this initial step. And look forward to further conversation. So it's nearly 10. I want to propose we take a short recess until, let's say, 3 till 10, so 9:57, and come back and bang out the rest of this meeting quickly if we can. So we stand in recess.
Taking a break before getting to the agenda.
What's that? All right, we're back in session and on to business on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call the first item?
Yes, on second reading and public hearing, we have TR 22-42, resolution requesting that the General Assembly amend Section 4.14 appointments of the Charter of the City of Falls Church to require that appointed members to city boards and commissions be at least 18 years of age and residents of the city, and removing the requirement that they be qualified voters of the city.
All right, Ms. Metzner.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This item is before you for public hearing pursuant to the city charter. So although it's a resolution, staff is asking that you conduct a public hearing and recommend approving this for submission to the General Assembly pursuant to that lovely, long but descriptive title. There is no changes to this item since you heard it at work session. Delegate Simon has filed this as a tentative draft pending your action tonight, so it is in process and will proceed if approved tonight. And with that, the city attorney and I'd be glad to answer any questions council has.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions council has? Any comments? Anyone on the internet? Ms. Hiscott?
I was going to move to adopt it if there were no other questions, but I don't want to interrupt any questions.
Mr. Snyder raised his hands.
Oh, he did.
Oh, Dave?
Thank you. I would just note that the Legislative Committee unanimously voted to support this. We'll have to watch this process very closely in Richmond because it became a target of the governor in the last session. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Hiscott?
I move to adopt TR 22-42.
And do we have a second?
Mr. Mayor.
We're going to have public comment. Just a second. I want to get the motion on the table, and then we'll go ahead and open it up to public comment.
Second.
So Ms. Leon in the second. I'm now going to open it up to public comment. Any member of the public wish to speak to this matter? Seeing none, it is closed to the public. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Our next item is TR 22-47, resolution providing guidance on the development of the FY24 budget.
Mr. Shields, you handling this?
So we were planning to just do like 2 slides to review the revenue forecast for the FY24 budget, which we discussed at the work session with the school board last week. And then after those 2 slides, or thereabouts, it's a very short number of slides, then I thought I would just hit some of the key points in the draft budget guidance and then turn it over to council for your direction on how to wrap up that document. The request tonight is to take action on this resolution with the budget guidance statement for the FY24 budget development. Karen?
Good evening, Mayor Tarter, members of the council. So we have before you just a quick summary of the discussion from the joint meeting last Monday with the school board and city council. And just to hit on some highlights, the revenue forecast for next fiscal year 2024. Real estate assessment are projected to grow by 3.9% overall. And that, along with the growth of 4.9% in all other taxes, which includes personal property, sales, meals, business license, and other taxes, which includes hotel, cigarette, and communication taxes. We are projecting an overall general fund tax revenue growth of 4.2%, which would generate new tax revenue of $3.7 million for next fiscal year. And as in the past, that has been shared equally between the schools and the general government, and that would yield a portion of $1,850,000 for each of the entities. Moving along, the next chart shows what that projection of 3.9%, how would that impact tax bill for a median homeowner price, and that 3.9% average increase would mean an increase of $424 in the tax bill in 2024. This chart shows the light blue bars, which is the tax rate, which has dropped over 5 years from $1.355 to a 1.23 for every $100 in AV. And then the blue line that's on top of those bars, that is the increase in the tax bill, the real estate tax bill for median homeowner. So moving along, just a reminder on what some of the key dates are going forward after receiving the guidance from City Council tonight. The next step would be the school's budget that comes out, the superintendent's budget proposal that is going to come out the second Tuesday in January, and that will lead into a CIP discussion on the general government side with Planning Commission, and Planning Commission recommendations are expected on March 1st. By the time the city would have finalized the real estate assessments, and that do make up a big part of the 60% almost of the revenues. So with that, city manager, along with school board, will be presenting their budget proposals on March 27th. That would be followed by public hearings and town hall meetings citywide, and anticipation of budget adoption by May 8th. And that budget would go into effect on July 1st, 2023. And with that, I will pass it on to Mr. Shields for discussion on some key highlights on the budget guidance resolution.
All right, let's hear your key highlights, Mr. Shields.
Well, so as Ms. Bawa just noted, and I think as the last discussion we just had, I think the main tension in this year's budget will be the cost pressures, both in making sure that we're providing competitive compensation, but also all of our other costs, buying materials, fuel, contracts are going up at a rate higher than what revenue growth is. So I think this will be a very challenging budget. Some of the key points that are in the draft before the City Council, there are some preliminary principles that are laid out, with the main thrust of them being the City of Falls Church is committed to providing valuable public services that promote a high quality of life in a cost-effective manner. The next paragraph addresses some of the cost pressures that we're experiencing as a government, and how dynamic the budget environment is this year. It has been for the past 3 years, really, as we've gone through the pandemic. So some of the key points in budget guidance. One is, in continuity of last year's, continue the spirit of cooperation and collaboration between general government and the schools in the development of the annual budget and CIP. The second draft bullet would be the FY 2024 general fund operating budget, inclusive of both general government and school operations, should strive to be within organic revenue growth, currently projected at 4.2% over the current 2023 budget. This guidance is mindful of the inflationary cost pressures that are being experienced by both the government, local businesses, and residences this year, and is also mindful that there may be greater budgetary challenges in FY 2025 should the economy go into recession, as some economists predict. So that's that bullet is oftentimes sort of the crux of the matter in terms of budget guidance. But I will hit a couple other key points that are drafted here. The budget should avoid the issuance of new debt. This would be our third year in a row of new debt if we're able to do that in FY24. And it does call for the responsible use of capital reserves to fund core community capital needs through the 6-year CIP. The discussion on compensation just a moment ago informs this bullet to sustain funding for professional development and training for the workforce, and ensure that employee compensation is competitive within the regional labor market, and foster strong employee retention and recruitment, and is sustainable over the long term. The budget should incorporate the findings of the independent compensation study that was completed this year. The next bullet talks about investments in our commercial districts and in special events. So that is new language that I know the council has mentioned on repeated occasions. And so for the first time, that would be in budget guidance about funding special events like Watch Night, Independence Day celebrations that have changed significantly over the pandemic years. The next three budget bullets relate to transportation. So first is sustaining the higher commitments towards streets, signals, and sidewalks, so that core infrastructure in our transportation network, as well as the rapid response crew to help make streets more safe and attractive for pedestrians and cycling. We discussed, this is a stable language from last year of using our NVTA 30% and 70% funds strategically. Also, as continuity from last year, is capping WMATA at the 3% statutory cap with the Virginia funding agreement of 5 years ago. So far, that's looking like that might be feasible for FY24. But the kind of the heavy regional work is going to be, if that's true, preparing for the fiscal cliff that WMATA is experiencing in FY25 when pandemic funds run out. The next bullet relates to sustaining funding for affordable housing. We currently have $100,000 built into the tax rate to support affordable housing. Promoting racial and social equity in the allocation of public dollars in the budget process. And then a new bullet, the budget should seek to implement and fund the recommended strategies of the Government Energy Plan and the Community Energy Plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then the final bullets are all continuity from prior years, funding stormwater infrastructure to mitigate flooding. Make sure that we keep track of the pension return on equity from the water sale proceeds, and ensuring that we have full public presentation and public communication on the budget initiatives. We've done videos in the past. We did a nice CIP video as well as multiple town halls, and we're always looking to enhance that effort each year. I'll stop there and happy to have any questions or ultimately take council direction on this.
All right. Questions, comments from Mr. Shields, Ms. Hiscott?
Just two opening comments, I guess. I'm very glad to see the environmental impact. We've worked hard to get those studies underway. It's taken years to get them, so I appreciate having that included as a driving factor in how we're determining how we're going to spend our funds moving forward. And I also like that we've had the word strives under 4.2% of organic growth, because there are so many drivers that are still unknown that will hopefully between now and the next 3 to 4 months we'll have more information on. For instance, we need to review this compensation and kind of decide philosophically where we're going to spend those dollars. And I think that hemming us in just at organic growth at this date is premature, though it is clearly an intended goal of those responsible for stewarding the funds of the city. So thank you for those two adds.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks. So Wyatt, I want to first of all make a comment about the process. As I said in our work sessions, I was very concerned about breaking apart how we handled the surplus from last year and this budget. I thought that was arbitrary, and I think it may create unnecessary budget problems for this coming year. But let me focus on a couple of the provisions here. What do you mean in the second bullet when you talk about responsible use of capital reserve to fund core community capital needs in a responsible manner? What did you have in mind with that? So we're not issuing more debt, but we're going to be chewing into our capital reserves?
So first, let me
what do you envision our capital reserves to be after this responsible use, as you call it?
So we have two areas of reserves. One is the unassigned fund balance, and that has a balance of about $19 million. And what we're discussing in this bullet is our capital reserves, which currently have a balance. We expect a year-end balance of about $12 million that will be there. So we built that up through our planning for the construction of the high school. We used a significant portion of the water sale proceeds also to build that capital reserve up. So what this bullet would stand for is that over the 6-year capital improvements plan to begin to deploy those capital reserves for pay-as-you-go capital improvements in the city. Now, am I advocating for the full $12 million to be used over the 6-year plan? No, I would not advocate for that, but I would advocate for a planned drawdown to a level that, A, will allow us to avoid new debt, and 2, will allow us to use local dollars that are much more flexible than all the federal dollars. And there's a good role for federal dollars and grants, but we know from our community, particularly on transportation projects, when there are needs are expressed for safety. If we use grants for that, we know it's a 3-year, sometimes a 6-year process if we really are going through that grant cycle. If you can use local dollars, then we don't have those strings attached, and we can put those dollars more quickly to use. I do think it needs to be discussed, though, in a 6-year plan. It should not be sort of a one-off, one-year type of allocation. I think it should be done over the full CIP. I hope that's
it also, okay, thanks. I think it also needs to reflect how we're actually doing with the payments expected from the West End development. The second point, the professional development and training, how much money are we talking about there?
So with the 2023 budget amendment, the council did put $100,000 into employee training and professional development. And so that's what I have in mind of trying to seek to sustain that level of money for staff development.
Okay, the next one was the special events and the lighting, et cetera, in the commercial areas. How much money are we talking about with that?
I don't know at this point. I want to kind of work with Rec and Park staff and with council in terms of what council's expectations are for those events. I think the signal has been that these are important community events. When we no longer have the fireworks, we can't do them at the high school anymore. What can we do in lieu of that would be a real community gathering focal point? And so I think we have some work to do to flesh those ideas out. I think this stands for, in this year's budget, for instance, we talked about it, but we didn't put dollars to it. And so you kind of end up in the same spot. So if we want to do things differently, we should talk about it at budget time.
Okay, the next one is higher levels of funding. That's your rapid response crew made necessary because we weren't able to get the job done with the existing crews for some reason. So how much are we talking about there?
Well, the existing crews are doing the jobs that they are tasked to do. And so if you want them to do new things, if you give them the same resources, you're going to get the same results. That's a basic, I think, thing that we all confront. So
how much are we talking about?
So that was, to sustain that, is $240,000.
Okay. Let's see. Let's go down then to the budget should seek to implement and fund the recommended strategies of the government energy plan and the community energy plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. How much are we talking about there?
So we'll need to work that out through the planning process and then through the budget process. So I don't have dollar figures for those at this point.
Okay, and then the employee, what we just heard about employee compensation, how much is that going to cost us?
So to implement the recommendations for the hybrid parity at, to maintain at the median of what the regional market is, that has an additional cost of approximately $200,000 to recommend, to follow those recommendations. The council already appropriated $200,000 in this fiscal year, so in total, those recommendations are about $400,000. So with an additional $200,000 that would be funded next year. The discussion about hitting higher metric points of 70% or 75%, we'll get those numbers to you, but it would be higher than that $200,000 figure.
So the reason why I went through this is to make the point that with this guidance, we're pretty much bumping fairly close to our half of the projected 4.2%. So I just want to make the point that there are the overall expectations for additional funding need to be somewhat more constrained even than in other years. So I wanted to make that point. And finally, I think there was a little discussion early on about the contribution of development. And one could argue on one hand that development has also brought increased school and service costs. And on the other hand, better negotiated development might have provided even more benefits, particularly in the commercial real estate area where we continue to see major vacancies in new projects. Thank you very much.
Ms. Connolly?
Thanks, Mayor Charter. Thanks for this, Wyatt. It's been interesting to see how budget guidance changes and shifts every year. And I think it'd be an interesting exercise to go back and see how close we came to budget guidance when we finally get to the budget 5 months later, because as Mr. Snyder just illustrated, there's so many unknown pieces coming up. I always worry that we're setting ourselves up for disappointing people when we say things like, we're going to keep within this area, or it's got to fall between here and there, when we don't know what all those budget drivers are. So I appreciate that there isn't a specific, we must hit this target, because I feel like there's just so many unknowns, as there always are at this point, as there are supposed to be at this point. There are a couple of things that I'd like to add in. Last year when we were presented with the budget, a C&I tax was in there, and that was surprising to everyone. So I'd like to review the C&I tax prior to the budget. And that could be through the Budget and Finance Committee in January and February, just to see if it's appropriate to add this year. I remember last year that the commercial rate, the commercial assessments were much less than residential assessments, and that was why it was added. But in the end, we decided that we didn't want to do it then. So I'm just wondering if this year might be a more appropriate year for C&I tax or not. So I'd like to do a study of that.
And one thing, just on the council schedule, we do have a briefing to discuss C&I in February. And
Okay.
So we do have that scheduled.
Okay, so can you add that to the budget guidance?
Would the council like to add that to the budget guidance? I didn't put it in there partly just because I know we're going to have a policy discussion of it, and I'm not sure the council has all the facts kind of right at your fingertips as to whether you want to make a statement on it at this point. But happy to try to draft one if
I mean, I
there is
guess
a
something like consideration or something like that, review or consider. I think that would probably be agreeable to most people. I don't know if you need to write that on the fly or city attorney needs to.
We'll do that while we're answering the next couple of questions.
All right. That sounds good. And then, of course, the biggest driver for the whole city is salary. And as we just talked with our salary consultant, that's a big concern. And I know that one of the things the schools talked about last week was the salary study that they are doing and their concerns for the requirements there as well. So that's a concern I have too, as far as how are we going to maintain salary as we go forward if we're constrained to a smaller increase. Of course, I know that a larger increase would mean more property tax, and it's just it's that delicate balance that we have to do between now and April. So I like to see that reflected in this document. The other thing that we added last year as part of the budget process was the balances in all of our different funds. And that is not in this statement. I don't know that it needs to be added, but I would like to note that when the budgets come out, both the general government and the schools now have an addition, and there's a chart that Budget and Finance did that shows how much is being held in all of our funds, similar to what was in the CAFR actually, but in our current year. So I think that's really important too. And then I think that is all I have for now, but thank you.
All right, other comments? Ms. Leon?
So I think, thank you so much for putting this budget guidance document together. You know, I don't know if it's too late to factor this recommendation or suggestion in, Mr. Shields, but you've got bullet points that imply dollars that have already been appropriated. So it's not net new expense, because the 4.2 is assuming that it's growth in addition to what we recognize in the current year plus the surpluses, right? So is that what the 4.2 implies? So 4.2 organic growth of revenue against FY '23 and it's against FY '20. It's against FY '22, right? Like the recent. So
it's against the revenue, the operating budget for FY '23.
Correct.
Accurate.
So for '23 operating
So
budget.
compared to the existing year's budget, we are projecting that we're going to have a total of 3.7 million.
So then I
extra.
think my suggestion, to not lose the point, but thank you for just re-clarifying that, is clarifying in this budget guidance what's already been appropriated, because it looks to imply, like Mr. Snyder said, that it's new spend when it's already, it's spend that's locked in, it's not net new. There's a combination of, you know, here's what we won't do, right, and incur new debt, here's what we've already appropriated, here's what we want to fund. So there's like 3 categories in the guidance document, but we've got it like splattered in between, and it's not categorized as amongst those buckets, but that's what exists here. So maybe, I don't know if it's too structural of a change in terms, I don't think it's structural, it's just organizational, so people can understand where the buckets are. Just a thought there. You know, in concept on this, you know, as a member of Budget and Finance Committee, I have to applaud what we've, you know, all the work of the prior councils before me in terms of where we are, right? We're in a growth mode. We experienced hardship with COVID, but we're sitting here on, you know, 18.2 million in ARPA money, 19% fund balance. I take it that's as of September, not as of June, because I thought the June unassigned fund balance was 21.3%. So, but we're now at 19.
So can I make a comment about that? So
can I just finish my statement?
Sorry.
before I make a comment? So then, you know, from a financial position perspective, you know, we're fiscally watching this. I also feel, you know, where the citizens have to share this burden, right? We hit them hard with property taxes, right, that were higher than expected. Real estate here is very resilient, even though the growth is expected to be less than what it was in the past, 2.9 compared to what it was like 7% plus in prior years. I just want to make sure that we bear in mind the burden, right, of what that tax bill looks like for citizens in the coming year. So I think what's really important with this budget guidance is that, you know, we strive to keep flexibility for ourselves in mind. It's very hard to stomach a CPI. You know, if you look at the November rate on CPI, it's 7.7%. It's the highest in 25 years. Like the chart starts at 25 years. It's the highest point that it's at. So half of our, you know, spending is non-personal spend, NPS spend, which is tied up in contracts that we always can't control those costs. So I just want to make sure that we, in the spirit of the budget guidance, we give ourselves the ability to, you know, not over restrict ourselves, commit to, you know, lowering this tax rate over time, right? But just giving us the flexibility when we have new information in the next 3 months to figure out where is inflation, where is this, the CPI index, and how are we trending against this recession that's being predicted. So overall, fundamentally, I think it's good to put the guidance out. When I see we should state where organic growth is, I just want to make sure that we don't overburden or lose the sight of the bigger picture, as we talk through the details on the bullet points. I hope that makes sense. But I do think it does help to structure this document with the categories that I'm seeing, right? Which is, here's some, here's some guidelines, 4.2% growth, stay within it, right? Here's some stuff we appropriated. Here's some stuff we want to support, but we don't have it funded that we want to make sure we make room for, in the upcoming budget. And that way it's just clear to the public that's reading this. Sorry, Ms. Bawa. You were saying about the unassigned balance.
Just a clarification on the fund balance, what we presented earlier in the CAFR. So that reports as of June 30th, what was left year-end that is recognized, and with that, it was 21.3%. But then we did a budget amendment, and we took $2.5 million out of that, and we appropriated it, right? So all the expenditure under spending, so that is not at 21.3%. It was as of that date, but then we asked for another $780,000 to bring because the expenditures are now increasing. We did end the year with lesser expenditures, so it's a moving target, but I just wanted to explain that number because we look at numbers from a budget perspective, and when we bring the year-end comprehensive financial report, that is looking at it from a very, very accounting perspective, and often those numbers are not going to match because a lot of other budget appropriations have happened since then, and then the fund balance has changed. But then, as Ms. Conley pointed out, we do include in the budget book the financial summaries, all the fund balances for different funds, and that is something we'll provide also as part of the budget discussion when we have the budget and finance. So this budget development is going to be a lot more informed based on where the fund balances are and where we'd like to be. So, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, other comments? Mr. Duncan?
So, good points all. I know the mayor would like us to talk about the budget for most of the rest of the night, but I will try not to do that. So what are we here for? We're here, as the bullet in line 157 says, to give guidance, and we want to give guidance that's mindful of the inflationary cost pressures that are being experienced by the government, local businesses, and residents. I agree with that. I think that's good language, and I interpret that as an instruction to try to arrive, not tonight, obviously, but over the course of the next several months, at a tax rate that enables us to meet, priority pressing spending needs, which have been outlined tonight, while sharing on both general government and school sides, while sharing the dividend of economic development with the citizens who, over a series of elections in the last 10 or 12 years, have voted for that economic development and who, I would argue, are supportive of it and, have benefited from it and deserve, a share of the benefits, financial benefits of it, particularly in this highly inflationary environment. So the $3.7 million estimated in revenue, I would divide three ways, with schools, general government, and the taxpayers each getting about $1.25 million. That's sort of where I start. I'm not going to go into any more detail because I learned the last time around with the budget when I thought, wow, maybe we can get it below 130, and then the manager came in with something that was lower than that, which proves he's a smart guy and had more information at his hand than I had when I made my estimate, and we ended up being able to, do a lot of good things with a tax rate that was 123. Did we do everything? No, we did not. And you've heard some of the things that want to be done here tonight, and I think most of them are meritorious. But as was said earlier, some of them, many of them, and as I look at it, have already been appropriated. And it's a matter of spending money that's already marked from underspending in past years, revenue above target, ARPA money, money above, money in the cracks of cushions like the opioid settlement money. There are innumerable sources, money above policy on reserves that I think we can draw from over the next several months to accomplish most of the things that have been asked for here tonight without, certainly without increasing the tax rate. And I would argue that we should be able to accomplish these things with a decrease in the tax rate. So that's what I'm hoping for. I hope that we'll all apply ourselves to that task. And I guess I would ask the schools and general government to have in mind what could be accomplished with about $1.25 million in new money as your baseline budget request. And then let's see over the next several months how things shake out in terms of revenues, inflation, costs that may fall favorably towards us, and see if we can accomplish it with an even lower tax rate than something around 2.5, 3 cents lower than we have now. I think that's all I have to say.
All right, thank you. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. So I'm going to start with things that I liked in the budget guidance. So, Mr. Shields, I appreciated the emphasis on the new things you added. So I think cyclists made it into budget guidance for the first time this year, which I appreciated, as well as I'm sure our cyclist friends. Continuing kind of investments in pedestrians, the special event stuff, the climate that Ms. Hiscott mentioned, and then on the responsible use of reserves. I think that's important. That's a point I made before. I think it was from the CAFR, from the previous budget discussion we have, I think unassigned, keeping it at 17%. Given that we are in the place where we need to look at total reserves, I think we're above 30%. Is that correct, Ms. Bawa?
We are.
And policy says between 20 and 25. So I feel pretty good that we've got a good cushion there. But thank you for those additions in the language, Mr. Shields. Second comment I have is really around revenue forecasts. So I know that right now we think real estate will be at 3.9, other taxes will be at 4.9. When do you expect that to be further refined? Is it really not till the March presentation?
We do have regional discussion every month with the assessors, and our assessor, Mr. Bailey, meets with them. They just had a meeting on December 1st, and I talked to him, or December 8th, and I talked to him a couple of days ago. And the forecast has not been refined a whole lot. The next meeting is going to be sometime in January. I'm going to hear about a couple of jurisdictions that kind of finish exactly on the dot as of December 31st, and they have wrapped up. So we may have some indications that are closer to final line for some of the jurisdictions, but ours and some of the neighboring jurisdictions happen early part of February to mid-February. So that is when we'll know the bigger chunk of our revenue forecast, which is the real estate assessed values. And then by the time we would have also received looked at our second quarter report. So February, mid-February is kind of the time that I feel we start getting some comfort level on trends for the 6 months, and then going forward, looking at where we're at. So.
Got it. So at the minimum, will probably be discussed in budget and finance. But Mr. Shields, do we have a planned kind of update to council on a financial update around then?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
The reason I ask is I know that obviously doing forecasts during COVID is very hard, but we've been conservative the past few years, right? Admittedly, I think we've ended up with year-end surpluses. And while year-end surpluses are fine, I think we clearly have more one-time money than we should. And so I think it creates a structural issue, and so I want to make sure that we are not being overly conservative in our revenue forecast, because nobody wants to just deal with the year-end surplus when really what we are talking about is having bigger operating needs, right?
Correct. So
I think that February discussion is going to be really important. If we can make sure we sync up with the schools, and obviously you'll be in the middle of budget, that'll be an important point to discuss. Other questions. Mr. Shields, Ms. Bowell, can you refresh my memory on what last year's budget growth was? Were we over 8%? Even with the large tax rate reduction?
we ended up in the guidance at, I want to say 6.2 or 6.3, that was the number.
Okay. And do you know what, by chance, the average tax bill increase was for the median home owner?
Yeah, that was one of the slides earlier. I think it was $900.
Yeah, 933 and,
Got it. And then I think I noted, maybe it was again from the CAFR, we added 14.5 positions across general government and schools last year. Does that sound correct?
yeah, yes.
And that was a pretty large jump, probably the largest jump we've had now in many, many years, correct?
That's correct.
And how many of those have been filled?
We'll need to get back with you.
Okay. But I suspect not all of them. Is that the answer? I'm going somewhere with this, so. So where I guess I come out is that my starting point, at least for this budget, is at organic revenue. So I hear my colleagues who would like to do more with the tax rate. I hear my colleagues who are concerned about not being able to fund all the priorities. I started talking about how we want to get to the PED things, we want to get to the climate change stuff, we want to get to the special events. But I think in the broader context, I think 4+% revenue growth is very, very healthy. And so I think that's an okay place to start for me. I'm not worried, but cautious might be the appropriate word, about not FY24, but what FY25 might look like. And so I do think that if there is potential recession, even though reserves offer a very healthy cushion, I do think that we need to be prudent about what the budget looks like this year, because there's implications for next year when things may not be as rosy and we may not have 4%. So that's kind of to my colleagues who want to cut the tax rate, why I'm kind of starting at a flat budget right now, or flat tax rate. To my colleagues who want to do more, given that we added 14+ positions last year, had a tax bill of $900, I do think that we need to let some of that growth work through the system. I want to make sure that we are prudent and not just throwing more money at the problem when we've already done that last year. And so some of it might just take time. And so maybe we just ask for a little patience. Based on the conversation we've had about the staffing compensation study, I think the staffing levels discussion is going to be just as important. Maybe it's not just throwing more money and salary, but it's also thinking about the number of people we have in City Hall. So I'm very open to that conversation and open to going up or down if those key priorities can't get funded. But where I guess I'm starting from, based on all the inputs that we've talked about, what last year's looked like, what the future looks like, my starting point, I think, is keeping an organic revenue growth. But Mr. Shields let us know kind of as we get to February and, what the revenue forecast looks like and where, budget numbers look. We're certainly open to the discussion after that. Thank you.
All right, other comments? I would agree. I'm also organic growth, flat, keeping our tax rate flat is where I would begin. I maybe could be convinced otherwise, but that's where I believe the starting point should be. We may very well have difficult days ahead with recession and other things potentially looming, or property values decreasing. But to me, starting at a budget that builds on flat tax rate and organic growth is where I think where we should start from. Do we have any further comments or a motion that anyone would like to make?
I have a real short sentence on the C&I tax, if council would like to hear it.
Sure.
Prior to budget presentation in March, staff will present information on a C&I tax as a potential means of funding transportation needs for the city, and council may provide additional guidance on that option.
All right. Does anyone would like
I like it.
Anyone would like to make a motion? While we're waiting on that, I'm going to see if there's any public comment. Does any member of the public wish to speak on this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Does anyone have a motion they'd like to make?
Mr. Mayor, just a quick question. Councilmember Duncan made an important statement. Do we want to balance the C&I tax? Even as we consider that, we also consider the possibility of lowering the tax rate. In other words, these things will both be on the table for discussion.
You're certainly welcome to make any motion you might want to make. I'm not sure how much guidance that gives us if we're keeping everything on the table. I presume that would still be on the table as it was last year, but you're certainly, welcome to add that or attempt to add that. I kind of feel like it's already built in there, but others may think differently.
That's an interesting question. Put yourself back where you were a year ago, Wyatt, and, then where we ended up with the budget. The things that unfolded, the thought processes you went through, I mean, yes, I would very much like to put my finger on the scale of saying, let's do that again. Let's try to lower the tax rate as we accomplish this ambitious program that we've laid out for ourselves. Do I need to make a motion to do that? Or can I just rely on, the professionalism of the staff to not overtax the electorate if it's not necessary? I mean, I guess I'm looking for guidance from you as to what you think is plausibly on the table.
So I'll try to make this concise. Last year was a different situation. We were bouncing back from a really big budget cuts that we made at the beginning of COVID. And so I think that there was an understanding that the budget was going to grow with new positions and other new things in the budget. And that 6.6% growth kind of set the mark for that. This year's budget is not really a bounce back budget. Our revenues now, I think, have stabilized afterwards. And our costs have greatly, I want to say, exploded. And so the environment where this is not a budget where we're thinking about lots of new initiatives. This is going to be a budget where there's going to be a huge amount of tension about sustaining commitments already made in a rapid cost environment, in an inflationary environment. That's going to be the tension. So what I'm saying is, with all the tax reduction discussions, that was in the context of a growth budget. This year is going to be in the context, I think, of a cutting budget.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, I think city manager's well laid out the parameters. And my concern is if we talk about raising taxes or studying the CNI tax increase, and we don't talk about looking at the opposite, depending on how things play out, we're giving the impression that it's okay to raise the taxes and perhaps unintentionally sending a signal to people that their ambitions ought to be other than, I think, what the city manager just laid out.
So specifically,
on the flip side of that,
what's that?
can I say something?
Of course.
Sorry.
Of course
Yeah.
you may.
The reason I was thinking it would be important to include the CNI tax would be to level things out, not to increase the residential tax rate necessarily, because commercial properties are increasing at a lower rate than residential are. So I was thinking of it more as an evening out thing. But if that's too difficult and tricky to put in there, we don't have to include it because we're going to have a work session on it. And if it appears that that's what that is saying, I don't want to cause any confusion in that regard. I think we have a lot of things we want to do. There's new things in this budget, and let's see how we can do it.
Mr. Mayor.
But if you think that
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mary Beth. I thought you were finished.
No, I just don't feel I don't want to put the CNI tax in, and then there's a concern that we have to balance it out with talking about cutting rates. I was more thinking of balancing it out by balancing out what the assessments are. But if that's way too detailed and specific, then there's not a need to put it in there.
Okay, if I could. Thank you for that suggestion. I think, yeah, I mean, from the other side of the ledger, I'd love to have us, cast a vote tonight to say we're going to lower the tax rate to 121 or 120 or whatever. There have been previous years when, in my impetuous youth, I would have pushed that. I'm not pushing it tonight because I hear, read the room and hear that there are a lot of expectations for service and so forth, and there's an inflationary environment that's particularly putting pressures on compensation for the schools and the city too. I think it's fine to have something on our work session schedule that says we'll talk about the CNI. I don't think it needs to be in this budget guidance in the same way that I hope that at every meeting between now and the end of April or May or whenever we finish the vote, we'll be talking about trying to do the very best we can in terms of service delivery at the most reasonably set tax rate that we can. So I personally don't feel a need to, memorialize that with a vote right now that tries to hold our feet to the fire to do it. So if there's a motion that basically supports the language that's laid out here, I'd be willing to support it, anticipating that we'll look at all sides of the issue, revenue enhancements and spending limitations, and a drawdown, as others have said, of resources that we have in reserve that are in excess of our policy, which is the first place that I would go for money before asking for more money from taxpayers who've paid their fair share in the last few years.
Okay, do we have a motion then?
Mayor, I move to adopt TR 22-47 without the modification that Mr. Shields proposed.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Snyder on the second. Any additional comment? Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah.
Mayor Charter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on to our final comments. Does anyone have any remarks relating to standing committees, business on the agenda, council member comments in general?
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to note that the transportation, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority approved their long-range plan. All of the city projects that were requested, thanks to staff and thanks to Letty in particular for bringing out the public in support of them. I think, Cindy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're all in the plan. Now, that's the good news. The plan has about $74 billion of projects, and I think the real challenge is going to be what we actually fund and are able to move forward. But Cindy, I wondered if you wanted to make any comments from a staff perspective.
I would concur with your summary and also the appreciative advocacy from the City of Falls Church governing body to get them in there, and then we'll work over the time to actually fund them. Thank you.
Great. Ms. Conley?
I just want to note that the Budget and Finance Committee meeting that was scheduled for Friday has been canceled.
Okay. Let's move on to approval of minutes.
Could I say one other thing? I just want to thank the Planning Commission in particular, which has been hard at work wrestling with the T-zones issue over the last, at least solid month. I know some of my colleagues have been to their meetings, as have I, and listened to a lot of public inputs. Very good discussion, very substantive, sometimes a little emotional, but you expect that with zoning. Zoning hits people where they live, literally. Anyway, I just want to thank the Planning Commission. I understand that they probably will be carrying over their discussion into the new year, so there's still plenty of time to weigh in on that topic.
All right, let's move
Mayor?
on. Yes?
Could I just do one quick thing
Yes,
triggered by Ms.
quickly.
Hardy's question? I sent out an email to all of you this evening on the VML Legislative Day, which is January 19th, so it's coming up earlier this year by a month. And if you can let the city clerk and myself know, we'll get the logistics registration hotel set up. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to approval of the minutes.
The minutes for the meeting of Monday, April 13th. Madam Clerk, line 20, we probably could maim the deputy city manager, who is named on another page later on, but is nameless in that first reference. And I think there's just a tense word, reconvened on April 22nd, actually is after the date of those minutes, so it would be reconvenes and will, or I guess would deal is still okay.
What line is that?
Line 19 through 19 and 20. Well,
Oh, got it,
actually,
yes.
line 20 it is. All right, and with that, I move approval of the minutes of meeting of Monday, April 13th, 2020.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Minutes of August 8th.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of the minutes of the meeting of Monday, August 8th, 2022, as presented.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Hiscott on the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it.
There's an and in line 31, Celeste, but you can change that. Didn't want, I know. Debbie was so excited, but I didn't want to ruin her day, night.
All right. Anything else anybody wants to say before we adjourn? Any final words?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, just in listing the people that I expressed appreciation for with the NVTA work, I failed to mention Councilmember Duncan, who participated in a committee meeting. So thank you. Thanks.
All right. Good work. Okay. Anything else? Any final words?
I got a great note about that subcommittee, which doesn't meet again until August of next year. So you can tell how important that subcommittee is. Good work.
All right. Unless there's anything else, we stand adjourned.